Tuka and Ashrain trekked through the forest, heading towards the area with yellow-eyed monsters as previously discussed. Ashrain still felt uneasy about being pursued and accompanying Tuka in this manner. Tuka reassured her that he not only needed an escort but also wanted Ashrain to be safe. She acknowledged this and promised not to question it further, but she also requested that Tuka use her life as he saw fit. Tuka paused and asked if Ashrain wanted to see Haim, her sister who was being held captive. Ashrain replied that she did not want to meet her, as approaching Haim in such a hostile situation would only endanger her. Besides, Ashrain was a fugitive from the country, fleeing from both her homeland and Haim. If they continued to think this way, the people of Nia would be safe. Ashrain took out her pendant and looked at it. Tuka could tell she held great affection for Haim, and Ashrain confirmed this before putting the pendant away. Reflecting on how Tuka had single-handedly wiped out the Black Dragon Knights, Ashrain wanted to inquire about his identity. Tuka confirmed that his identity was exactly as he had described to Civet. He was a man seeking vengeance. Ashrain understood that encountering the Forbidden Witch was a necessary step in Tuka's quest for revenge. She wondered who the target of his vengeance was, and Tuka revealed that it was the goddess Visis in the northern capital of Alien, amidst the high mountain ranges and the ruins of the ancient dragons. Meanwhile, Augu was still diligently leveling up after taking down another giant eagle. She turned to check on her companions behind her. It turned out they were students who did not want to fight. Akaya assured them that there was no need to force themselves into battle, as long as they learned to protect themselves. Minamino, trembling, apologized to Aya for being unable to help her fight. Akaya reassured her that it was all right and that she would handle the monster hunting. The others were deeply grateful to Aya for defending them when they were about to be discarded by the goddess. This had left Akaya puzzled. She wondered why the goddess would deliberately spread such claims. Reflecting on this, Akaya felt exhausted, troubled by the fact that even an ally like the goddess was causing her doubts. She then took out her dagger and began to collect materials from the monster, quietly vowing to do her best to ensure that no more of her classmates would die. The pitiable image of Tuka lingered in her mind, an image that she found hard to forget. What she needed to do now was to become stronger and continue leveling up. If the goddess's words were true, then as an S-rank hero, she would definitely be able to defeat the Demon King and return everyone to their old world. Akaya managed to extract a pouch of something and then called Sue, asking if she could help her fend off monsters. When caught off guard, she requested Sue to do her best to keep everyone safe. Sue, an S-rank hero, hesitated but eventually agreed. Among the 7 people on the elimination list, when Aya asked if anyone wanted to level up by delivering the finishing blow, only Aya herself raised her hand. Akaya assessed that while this girl lived a reclusive life, she was courageous in her own way. What puzzled Aya was why Sue was on the elimination list. The remaining friends were apologizing to Akaya for being so useless, but she just smiled and said that everyone has their own strengths and weaknesses. She also shared that apart from combat magic, there were other types of magic, such as support and enhancement spells, that could make teammates stronger, as well as magical tools that could boost combat capabilities. But for now, she wanted her friends to learn how to protect themselves before thinking about collaborative combat. These words gave the dejected friends a glimmer of hope. Akaya encouraged everyone to fight together, defeat the Demon King, and then return to their world. Minamino and the others felt very happy and fortunate to be grouped with Aya. Suddenly, a shadowy figure appeared. It was Yasu, the dark hero. Upon meeting Aya, Yasu loudly declared that both of them were struggling and carrying a bunch of useless people was quite exhausting. This comment caused the others to frown, but Aya said nothing. Yasu then asked Aya if she found it tiring, but Akaya replied that she had never considered her friends a burden. Pleased with her answer, Yasu said that Aya would surely shine brightly, proposing that she join his team. However, Akaya declined, stating that she couldn't work well with Yasu. Yasu gave a thumbs up and continued asking if Aya knew what the goddess called heroes ranked B and below. She referred to them as white heroes, which according to Yasu meant garbage, literal trash. Akaya firmly refuted this, insisting that they were not garbage. Just then, a group of large-eyed monsters appeared behind Aya. They were powerful yellow-eyed monsters. She quickly ordered everyone to fall back. Yasu's followers immediately begged him to save them. Yasu eagerly complied, his eyes glowing with a fiery symbol. A massive fire sword descended from the void, creating a gigantic inferno that incinerated all the yellow-eyed beasts. Akaya was astonished, thinking it must be Yasu's personal skill. His followers clapped and continuously praised him, while Yasu struck a pose, declaring that he hadn't used all his power yet. Seeing Yasu show off, Akaya realized that he had completely transformed. He was no longer the timid Yasu who had always feared being bullied. Lightning suddenly flashed across the sky. Aya approached to investigate and discovered that it was the Tea sisters who had just finished dealing with a group of yellow-eyed monsters. The monsters were sliced cleanly in half, indicating the sisters' formidable strength. Aya realized that despite being an S-rank hero, she had not unlocked any personal skills yet. Hijiri noticed Aya and told her to come out, reassuring her that they wouldn't harm her. Akaya apologized for eavesdropping, and Hijiri explained that they had come over out of curiosity after hearing the commotion. It seemed Aya had gained a few more teammates. Akaya shyly confirmed this, and Hijiri asked if she was all right. Akaya said she was doing her best, which Hijiri took to mean that she wasn't okay. Hijiri approached Aya and told her not to look away while answering. Then, Hijiri gently held Aya's face and said, "Please take good care of yourself." Itsuki also came over, patted Aya on the shoulder, and advised her not to be too harsh on herself. The Tea sisters then left, with Itsuki adding that her older sister really liked Akaya. Akaya was puzzled, wondering what that meant. Hijiri urged Itsuki to hurry, and as she did, she confirmed that, as Itsuki had said, she also really liked Aya. The exit was ahead, and Aya felt relieved that she had somehow managed to lead everyone back safely. Minamino was surprised to see Oyamata fervently farming monsters ahead. The surrounding girls praised Oyamata's impressive performance, but he didn't appreciate the compliments and even dismissed them rudely with an arrogant expression. Oyamata complained about the slow leveling and the decrease in monsters, then told Aya not to bring those useless heroes to interrupt his farming. He also questioned why she was leading the group of outcasts. Akaya chose not to respond and simply led everyone away in silence. Suddenly, a figure appeared in front of the shop, Kirihara, dragging a still-living monster. His face remained cold and expressionless, which made Aya uneasy. He threw the barely alive monster onto the ground and demanded that it scream louder. He then stabbed the creature multiple times with his sword, hoping that its cries would attract more monsters for additional experience points. The beast's shrieks pierced the sky, causing birds to flee in terror. This scene made Kirihara's group shiver in fear due to its brutality. With a murderous look on his face, Kirihara asked who cared about such matters and if anyone intended to criticize him. His face resembled that of a killer. Suddenly, Oyamata called out to him and rushed over, offering flattery by saying that Kirihara was actually very clever. However, no monsters appeared, causing Kirihara to become furious. Feeling that it was a waste of time and effort, he swung his sword and decapitated the bull-headed monster. Akaya and her group sweated with fear as Kirihara proclaimed that he was already too strong for these weak monsters, and that they only served to tire him out. Suddenly, a figure appeared among the ruins. Oyamata didn't recognize her. She was a girl with cat ears wearing a ring dress, but her face was very beautiful. She even had a metal tail. Were those real cat ears? The girls below sneered, questioning who would dress so provocatively. Yasu was excited while Aya felt that she had seen a sword similar to her tail somewhere before. The Tea sisters watched attentively. The cat-eared girl declared that she was a representative of the goddess and would be responsible for guiding them while the goddess was occupied. She promised to ensure everyone's safe return today. Upon seeing her, Oyamata challenged her, saying that his group would not listen to someone weaker than them. The girl leaped down and asked Oyamata if he wanted to fight. If she didn't defeat him in one strike, she would consider herself defeated and accept any consequences, even becoming a slave. Oyamata, feeling highly provoked, was determined to teach this small girl a lesson she would never forget. He shouted, "You little, state your name." The girl calmly replied that Oyamata had quite a foul mouth and her name was Nyen, one of the goddess's apostles. Upon hearing this, Oyamata laughed derisively, unable to believe that someone was actually named Nyen. He mocked her, suggesting she might as well be called Cat. Oyamata vowed to make her fail miserably and then to teach her a lesson. Nyen drew her dagger and charged forward while Oyamata prepared a powerful magic punch, the red fist warning her to be careful not to get hurt. With her impressive legs, Nyen moved incredibly fast and closed the distance to Oyamata in the blink of an eye. Simultaneously, Oyamata threw his punch. However, Nyen swiftly countered, knocking Oyamata to the ground. He muttered in disbelief, "Strong, so strong." Akaya was astonished, realizing that this was Nyen's method for dealing with skilled opponents. Nyen stated that the previous fight was just a form of greeting. She then turned and announced that she would escort everyone back to the capital. The students were left in stunned silence, and Kirihara also remained quiet. Nyen added that she would discuss the goddess's upcoming plans on the way back, and informed them that they were about to enter the next phase. A few days prior, the goddess had summoned Nyen and informed her that recent movements of the demon lord had kept her very busy. Nyen, currently stationed in the small nation of Yusa, seemed underutilized for her skills. Therefore, the goddess wanted Nyen to become her representative. Understanding the implication, Nyen stepped forward to demonstrate her loyalty by licking the goddess's feet, doing so fervently for some time. The goddess thanked Nyen for her devotion and entrusted her with the management of the heroes, also reassuring her that Nyen's younger sisters were being carefully protected and that she needn't worry. Suddenly, there was a knock on the door, and a divine officer entered, witnessing the bizarre scene. He trembled and sweated, but the goddess reassured him that it was merely a loyalty ritual. She then instructed the divine officer to proceed with his report. It turned out that Urza had reported an issue involving the 5 dragon warriors. The goddess was aware that they were pursuing Sarah's Ashrain. Although she had initially considered using Ashrain for some tasks, she found her too straightforward and difficult to manipulate, thus abandoning that plan. Ashrain, whose nation had been devastated, was indeed unfortunate. On the other hand, Civet was an unreliable pawn, but he had potential value in the development of the heroes. The goddess then cheerfully conceived an idea to advance the heroes to the next level of training. She planned to invite elite warriors from this world, including the 4 pillars of the Holy, the Tiger Sword Order, and the Black Dragon Knights, to engage in real combat with the heroes. This would expedite their growth. The divine officer immediately complied with the order while Nyen, who had not received further instructions, continued to diligently lick the goddess's feet. The goddess did not anticipate that the day when the heroes would confront the demon lord would arrive so soon. Tuka and Ashrain continued to run at full speed, with Tuka recounting everything to Ashrain as they went. Ashrain was surprised to learn that Tuka had been thrown into such a terrifying place by the goddess. Tuka further explained that he had found the Azure Dragon Gem and Sage Zhanglin in that dungeon. Ashrain was astonished, realizing that even a sage had been treated so poorly. Tuka speculated that Anglan might have been a thorn in the goddess's side. This made Ashrain even more impressed by Tuka's strength, as he had managed to overcome such a dreadful dungeon. Tuka remarked that aside from a bit of pride and boasting about it, there wasn't much to say. His only true interest was seeing the goddess suffer in the end, and he would crush anything that stood in his way of revenge without mercy. They came to a halt, and Tuka mused that this selfish desire for revenge might not fit someone as proud as Ashrain. However, Ashrain disagreed. She felt that without Tuka, she wouldn't have survived this long, and she was willing to sacrifice her life to help him, even if it was just a little. She then knelt before Tuka as she had before her master. Ashrain acknowledged that her title as the leader of the Holy Knights and her value had diminished, and even the former King Ultra no longer needed her. Therefore, she hoped Tuka would not hesitate to use her. Tuka covered his mouth thoughtfully and then said that if she felt that way, it was fine with him. Ashrain was thrilled, thinking that her master had truly accepted her request. Tuka, on the other hand, was surprised to find someone who prioritized loyalty and gratitude above all else. people who were certainly trustworthy. He asked once more if he could use Ashrane's power. She eagerly confirmed that she would meet his expectations. Tuka reflected that perhaps by showing gratitude, one would receive it in return. He had started his relationship with Ashrane because she resembled his aunt, and now it had blossomed into something like this. Yet he didn't forget that revenge had to remain the top priority. Seeing Tuka's grim and dangerous expression, Ashrane felt a bit anxious. Tuka turned and smiled, apologizing. "Sorry, Ashrane, I will repay the benefits I received from you with rewards." He then placed a hand on her shoulder, and Ashrane, sweating, thought that Tuka was quite straightforward. Ashrane also asked Tuka if she could call him "my lord" to avoid any misunderstandings in the future. Tuka reluctantly agreed, as it seemed she was determined to serve him as a slave, and no one could stop her. However, Tuka felt that "my lord" was a bit too formal. Ashrane then suggested calling him Tuo instead, and Tuka agreed. Tuka then assigned the task of guarding their rear to PG, and Ashrane cheerfully responded, "Yes, my lord." 2 days later, at a village situated between the capital Urza and the city of Mills, the two of them arrived. Tuka continued to study the route he needed to take to reach the great ruins. Coincidentally, a festival was taking place in the village, attracting visitors from all directions. He walked to a secluded spot and opened his system menu, checking his sleep skill, which had reached level 3. It now had an on-off toggle and a sleep duration meter. It seemed that the sleep duration had been extended. He tested it on an innocent sleeping villager. He also tried out the freeze skill and discovered that it affected inanimate objects as well as living beings, but it couldn't be stacked with other skills. Another drawback was that the range of the freeze skill was quite limited, similar to the sleep skill, and the frozen target could remain frozen for up to 300 days. At this point, there was no toggle for the skill, which meant he might need to wait until the skill leveled up to gain more control. These limitations made the freeze skill harder to use. Tuka thought deeply, coming up with a strategy to address the issue of dealing with infected corpses. The festival atmosphere was lively, with various entertainments. Tuka noticed a merchant selling masks and inquired about them. He learned that one of the masks was from the legendary Fly King, a demon lord who had established an island for demons a century ago and had repelled numerous intruders over the years. The epic battles had made the story famous and widely known. Tuka was surprised to see that the Demon King's tale was remembered by the world. He asked if the mask was a rare item and was told that it was quite common. He then inquired about another mask, a hooded one worn by the Fly King's subordinates, often used by children to play villains. Tuka decided to purchase one of each. The merchant thanked him and pointed out the mirror for him to check his appearance. While looking in the mirror, Tuka began to ponder what he should say if someone asked him about his profession. He suddenly came up with an idea. He would create a mercenary company. Although it only had 2 members and a slime at the moment, it didn't matter. This mercenary company would fight against the goddess. Tuka decided to disguise himself as the Fly King, feeling that it suited him perfectly. Being a hero was nothing compared to being a demon lord. Thinking about the goddess, he eagerly anticipated the day he would defeat her. No, he would torment her mercilessly until she withered like a dry twig. In the kingdom of Magnal, in the wolf tribe's meeting room, the continent's leaders were in discussion. They were shocked to learn that the Black Dragon Legion had been completely wiped out, with no idea who could have done such a thing. The White Wolf King of Magnal considered it a colossal loss, as their main force against the Demon Lord had been utterly annihilated. The meeting included Queen Yenadu, Warrior King Azra, and King Alien. King Alien asked the goddess if she had any plans. The goddess smiled and said she needed the 4 sacred beasts and the death dragons to come to her. She also mentioned that stopping the Demon Lord's advance would have to rely on the Berserk Emperor. The Berserk Emperor, named Fakan Dawson, was idly twirling his hair, lamenting that no matter how hard they tried, they would ultimately need the heroes of Alien to end the battle, and Alien would take all the glory. However, they had no choice. The goddess thought this was unavoidable, as everyone born in this world was affected by the Demon Lord's dark influence, so they couldn't use their full strength. Even the descendants of heroes were similarly constrained. King Alien agreed, noting that even the goddess was affected. The goddess thanked the other nations for their support, acknowledging that they were the only country that had managed to maintain the summoning secret arts. On the other hand, Alien had suffered significant resource losses due to the summoning and training of heroes. The goddess asked the Berserk Emperor if he was still dissatisfied after hearing this. The Berserk Emperor remained silent and then inquired about the legend of the Godslayer. The goddess tried to avoid this topic, deeming it quite inappropriate. Falcon sighed and then apologized to Vices for wasting time, and the meeting continued. The goddess smiled cheerfully, and they resumed discussing the war situation. The Demon Lord had captured the Night City and was moving closer to their central region. Everyone needed to unite more than ever. King Alien declared that they would expedite the training of the heroes, while Yenadu suggested that the nations invest more to compensate for the loss of the Black Dragon Knights. However, the White Wolf King grimaced and asked once again whether the destruction of the Black Dragon Legion was the work of Ashrain. Everyone was skeptical. Ashrain didn't have the capability to accomplish this, so it had to be someone else. Some proposed finding that individual and persuading them to fight for humanity against the Demon Lord, while others suspected that the culprit might be a demon. Meanwhile, a report to the White Wolf King indicated that there were no signs of demons in the area. Those who could kill Civet were supreme beings, such as the four sacred beasts or the deity Vices. Ironically, some had come forward to claim responsibility for the act, and indeed this rumor had spread quickly across the continent. The group making these claims was a source guild known as a set in the capital of Urza. Monroy City PG continued to hide and took his cloak. Today they would enter the city. It had been 3 days and they had not encountered any pursuit. Tuka was surprised that Urza remained so calm after learning that the neighboring country's Night Legion had been wiped out. Ashrain found this reasonable, as Urza's military forces were considered weaker compared to those of other nations. They knew that facing the Black Dragon Knights in battle would result in inevitable defeat. Tuka thought that it was thanks to the goddess's intervention that they had survived until now, but Ashrain believed there was a deeper reason. Currently, Urza had a man famous for his title Dragon Slayer. He was only summoned when the country needed to display its strength, but they knew this man could not defeat Civet, as Civet was the strongest of humanity. In fact, this man might not even be able to handle the 5 dragons, war heroes of the Black Dragon Legion. Moreover, the Dragon Slayer was notoriously lazy, so he would certainly avoid facing difficult enemies. The two continued their journey and were looking for an inn. Tuka intended to book separate rooms for each of them, but Ashrain thought it would be a waste of money. Tuka reminded her that after all he was a man. This made Ashrain blush and her heart race. She insisted that it wasn't a problem, as they had shared a room before. So Tuka decided on a single room and asked Ashrain not to regret it. The hotel owner began registering them, and upon learning they were mercenaries, guessed that they would be heading to the arena. Tuka simply smiled and confirmed that this was indeed the case. Ashrain had told him about the arena. It was a place where slaves and mercenaries fought each other in bloody and brutal battles. It was run by the ID Duk family in the Mercenary Guild. The arena was very popular at that time, and it was where mercenary guilds evaluated their new warriors. Poor mercenaries would rush to sign up, hoping to earn a lot of money with just one victory, and those who were favored might be kept by the arena management for long-term performances. The more Ashrain spoke, the more useful she seemed. She knew almost everything like an elf dictionary. She also mentioned that the Mercenary Guild and the Mage Guild had significant influence nationwide and could participate in many activities. Tuka wondered if it was similar to the Saber Tiger adventurers he had encountered before and wanted to learn more about the egg. Ashrain suggested going to the public library in the city, as it might have useful information. Since Ashrain didn't know much more, Tuka guessed that perhaps forbidden magic might have information about the egg. Afterward, the two of them went to a tavern and gathered more information. In the process, they ordered a few dishes and 2 beers, mainly to blend in while eavesdropping on the conversation around them. Soon, the people at the next table began discussing the Black Dragon Knight Brigade. It was revealed that the exterminator of the brigade had leaked information about them, and Ashrain was dead upon hearing this. Ashrain nearly choked on her beer, and Tuka took a worried glance at her to see if she was all right. The two men continued talking, saying that Ashrain had been defeated and killed by the 5 dragons, and that the person who had slain all 5 dragons was a figure known as Ascent, a group of dark mages rumored to be recently active. They even went around bragging about their supposed deeds. Hearing this, Tuka asked Ashrain what she thought. The information about the battle had spread everywhere, though it was not entirely accurate. Dark magic was not common in this world, so it seemed like these mages were trying to promote their own strength. This made Tuka feel fortunate, as he no longer needed to be overly cautious about being pursued. With only 1 day left before they would enter the demon territory, Tuka knew the truth would eventually come to light. It was good to have someone buying them time. Just as he thought this, a hooded figure burst through the door, declaring himself as the Dark Mage Guardian of Lord Mwaji, the cursed god's offspring, and demanded everyone clear out of the way. Tuka remained silent as the newcomers boasted about their self-proclaimed achievements. The two men at the table became suspicious, thinking these new arrivals were just talking nonsense. On the contrary, they guessed that the real culprit was the female leopard warrior from the arena. This piqued Tuka's interest as they mentioned that the leopard warrior had encountered a forbidden mage and was the strongest fighter in the bloody arena. Tuka immediately brought more beer to their table and eagerly asked them to elaborate on the story. Seeing Tuka's keen interest, the two men happily shared more details. They revealed that the leopard warrior had once disclosed to her teammates that she had not only encountered a forbidden mage, but was also familiar with the area of the golden-eyed demons. After listening intently, Tuka pieced together that the woman was likely a dark elf, and that the forbidden mage indeed resided in the golden-eyed demon territory. Tuka realized he needed to visit the blood arena to investigate further. Tuka then asked how he could meet the woman. They told him that he could still find her at the arena at this hour. Unexpectedly, outside, the townspeople were in a state of panic, and someone was running quickly. The man burst into the tavern, praising Tuka's luck, saying that the strongest fighter in the arena, Eve, was none other than her. The female warrior Eve sat down at the table and ordered a T-bone steak along with a glass of beer. For some reason, the waitress blushed when she saw this tigress. Her presence was too intense. Tuka decided that to learn the truth about the forbidden witch, he would ask Eve directly. Ashrain mentioned that if anything went wrong, she would intervene, and Tuka would have to rely on her abilities. Meanwhile, Eve was enjoying her meal as Tuka started approaching her. He took out a gold coin, placed it on the table, and with a smile said he would like to treat Eve to something. Eve immediately asked him what he wanted. After briefly introducing themselves, Eve continued eating and urged him to get to the point. She clearly knew he wasn't approaching her just because she was a fighter. Knowing he shouldn't beat around the bush, Tuka directly asked if Eve knew the whereabouts of the forbidden witch. Everyone knew that the witch's location was in an area densely populated with golden-eyed monsters, but the exact spot was unknown, so Tuka had to ask Eve. Eve shared that she had spent 2 weeks wandering in that area and returned safely. She joked with her colleagues that it was the forbidden witch's magic that allowed her to come back. Hearing this, Tuka understood and didn't press further, instead asking if she didn't know the exact location of the witch. Eve confirmed this, but the wind spirit immediately informed Ashrain that Eve was lying without blinking an eye. Their conversation also drew the attention of the men at the next table. Eve warned Tuka that the area wasn't easy to traverse. Even she, the strongest fighter in the arena, couldn't guarantee survival for 2 weeks. Eve took the gold coin and added a piece of advice, telling Tuka that he was still young and should value his life. Tuka returned to the table and asked Ashrain for her opinion. She said outright that the girl had lied. Knowing she lied confirmed one thing: Eve knew the whereabouts of the forbidden witch. The two of them went back to their room and closed the door to discuss what to do next. Tuka asked what the priority was for fighters aside from their lives. Ashrain believed it was money. They risked their lives mainly for money to buy their freedom and then retire. At this point, Tuka saw the logic and pulled out a dragon pouch, wondering if it would be enough to bribe Eve. But this was the last priority. First, they still needed to gather more basic information. The next morning, the two of them split up to take action. Tuka went to the arena to chat with some guys while Ashrain also took the opportunity to gather information. The amount of information they gathered was immense, thanks to Eve being the most famous fighter around. They quickly learned Eve's entire history, from being enslaved to becoming the most renowned fighter. Tuka was astonished to learn that Eve had been undefeated for the past 3 years. She had become a symbol of the place, and no one wanted to see her fail. Perhaps this was because Eve fought with a captivating style that won the audience's hearts. They also found out that tomorrow would be Eve's final match. Tuka guessed that after tomorrow, Eve would have enough money to buy back her freedom. The surprising part was that Eve had already earned enough ransom money 2 years ago, meaning she was still making money for someone else. Tuka immediately pondered this carefully, and then Ashrain thoughtfully handed him a piece of paper with some information on it. He learned that the person Eve was trying to ransom was a child who didn't seem to be Eve's daughter. The situation suddenly became complicated, and Tuka felt extremely troubled. Should he use the money to hire her to escort him after she gained her freedom? However, Ashrain's voice broke Tuka's train of thought. She said there was still one important thing she had heard. Tuka was surprised by how much information this girl had gathered, all of which was crucial. He asked how she had obtained this information. Ashrain worriedly said that she had approached an information broker. Tuka felt a bit somber, realizing he had forgotten that such places existed in this world. Ashrain, feeling embarrassed, explained that she knew about these places because Haim had taught her to counter the schemes in the royal palace. They had to use information brokers. It turned out that a shady place like that always had its uses. Ashrain apologized to Tuka for going there without telling him, but the problem was that these people hated anyone who didn't know of their existence. Those who wanted to connect with them even had to learn a kind of protocol similar to a password. If answered incorrectly, they would be refused. Ashrain apologized again, but Tuka said it was okay. In fact, he found Ashrain's information very useful and felt grateful. Ashrain blushed and praised Tuka for being so kind. Tuka thought this girl was overcomplicating things, as there was nothing to blame her for. Tuka then asked about what Ashrain had gathered. It turned out that the final matches of the strongest fighters often ended in their defeat. That seems strange. Ashrain mentioned that it looked like the promoters of these fighters had tampered with something to influence the matches. After hearing this, Tuka grinned slightly, finally catching a clue. He felt a bit scummy. Tuka explained that if the promoters were about to lose a famous fighter after his final battle, they would do something to make another fighter famous overnight. Ashrain was horrified, realizing they might kill the most famous fighter, making the other fighter instantly famous. So that was it. Tuka was certain the Dukes would interfere, so they needed to stop this. He decided they needed to act immediately and approached Eve, asking to talk with her for a bit. Eve wanted to refuse, thinking this guy just wanted to ask about the Forbidden Witch again. Ashrain appeared and exposed Eve's lie, putting pressure on her. Eve snapped and shouted, "What do you want?" Tuka bluntly declared that they would be in trouble if Eve died tomorrow. His reason was simple. If the person who knew about the Forbidden Witch died, he would be left completely in the dark. Hearing this, Eve glared at him. She understood that continuing to lie and leaving was no longer feasible. She gripped her sword tightly and asked, "The Dukes tampered, didn't they? Do you have proof?" Tuka had no proof, but Eve was not unaware of the possibility. Although she was a slave of Duke Wan, he was a notorious scoundrel. Tuka suggested that Eve escape with the girl. Eve glared at Tuka angrily and declared that if he dared to touch the girl, she would fight him to the death. To clear up this misunderstanding, Tuka explained that anyone who thought it through could figure it out. Eve had earned enough ransom money 2 years ago but continued to earn more, which could only mean she was helping the girl gain her freedom. After hearing this, Eve thanked Tuka for the warning but said she couldn't abandon her final fight. She was determined to earn her freedom with her own hands. Tuka suggested once again that he would help her escape, but Eve still refused, believing there was nowhere to hide. Her owner was the Duke of this land, and if they ran, they would be hunted by the mercenary guild. Life on the run would be harsh, and Eve didn't want the girl to suffer that fate. Ashrain felt a bit moved by Eve's selflessness. Seeing that Eve was worried about the insecurity of hiding, Tuka came up with another suggestion. Didn't Eve know of a perfect hiding place? Eve asked where that might be, and Tuka responded that it was the location of the Forbidden Witch. Eve replied that no one would go to such a desolate place and that not everyone could enter. Hearing this, Tuka was certain that Eve knew the exact location of the Forbidden Witch. Tuka proposed that if Eve cooperated with them, he would promise to protect both of them with all his might. He asked Eve if she was willing to take that bet. Eve shook her head, noting that while Ashrain seemed to have some fighting skills, Tuka appeared too weak and frail. She had no confidence in their ability to survive in the golden-eyed demon territory with such a team. Tuka had no choice but to declare that he was the one who defeated the Black Dragon Knight Brigade and that the Asen gang were just pretenders. Eve shook her head in disbelief. Tuka, not surprised, raised his hand and prepared a paralysis spell as proof. A bolt of lightning shot into the sky. After that, Tuka and Ashrain left, reluctantly accepting that their negotiations had failed. Ashrain noticed her master's disappointment, knowing that he dearly wanted Eve to join them. Tuka was greedy, wanting to make Eve his ally. With her on the team, their mercenary group would be immensely powerful. According to their calculations, Eve would have to leave Monroy even if she survived. They hoped Eve would realize this soon. Ashrain asked if there was any chance that Eve could win the final battle and live freely with the girl. Tuka quickly said no, that was impossible. Eve's owner was a notorious scoundrel, and there would be no future for her. Tuka felt bitter because such a vile owner was poison to someone as honorable and decent as Eve. He knew that the Duke would use every means to exploit Eve until she was completely spent. For Tuka, straightforward and kind-hearted people like Eve were foolish, knowing the risks but refusing to act. Late that night, a carriage carrying the head of the mercenary guild and Duke Wan appeared. The two met secretly to discuss something. Eve, sensing a bad premonition, felt a bit relieved after talking to Tuka and witnessing his display of power. It seemed Eve had come to believe that Tuka indeed had the capability to defeat an entire brigade. It appeared that Tuka trusted Eve greatly to perform such a demonstration. Eve thought that Tuka was an honest person. Unlike her master, despite being the strongest fighter, she was still just a slave. Eve decided to verify Tuka's words by eavesdropping on the Duke's conversation directly. Inside the room were the Duke, the head of the mercenary guild, and the Duke's chief guard, who was also Eve's opponent for tomorrow. He was infamous for his cruelty and cold-blooded nature, having eliminated countless opponents of Duke Wan. Eve couldn't enter the room, so she sat on the roof, listening carefully. Most of their conversation was about the upcoming fight and preparing a worthy opponent for Eve. Nothing seemed out of the ordinary. It wasn't until Duke Wan asked if Eve had to die tomorrow that things took a dark turn. The head of the mercenary guild confirmed, stating they would give her a sedative just enough to slow her down without arousing the audience's suspicion. The audience wanted to see a fair fight, and they couldn't afford to disappoint them. The Duke mentioned he had tried to persuade Eve many times, but she remained steadfast, saying she could no longer continue such battles. Zahn sneered, suggesting he had pampered her too much, leading her to disdain the fights. He lamented the waste of a fighter who could captivate the audience. Meanwhile, Eve was on the roof, clenching her teeth in anger. Duke Wan continued, saying that no matter what, Eve was just an animal. Tomorrow, since she was just an animal, they would skin her and have the new fighter wear her skin, making a grotesque display to entertain the crowd. Hearing this, Eve's anger boiled over, and she realized the depths of her master's cruelty. It was clear that the fight tomorrow was a setup for her inevitable demise, and they planned to make a grotesque display of her body to entertain the crowd. The head of the mercenary guild praised the idea, saying it was brilliant and would surely win the audience's hearts. The chief guard remained silent with his arms crossed. The head of the mercenary guild then asked what would happen if Eve won tomorrow. Duke Wan, seeming expressionless, replied that it didn't matter because she would die anyway. When they found a new star, the old one would only become a hindrance. The head of the mercenary guild then inquired about the girl Eve wanted to ransom, knowing she was a young dark elf and still a virgin. He suggested that releasing her would earn some goodwill from the fans. However, Duke Wan quickly dismissed this idea, saying he would take over the girl himself. Although she was still young, she would soon become a stunning beauty. Hearing this, Eve's rage reached its boiling point. The head of the mercenary guild was surprised, thinking that Zahn, having cooperated with Eve for so long, would have some sentiment towards her. It turned out that Zahn had never seen Eve as a partner, only as a slave, a mere pet. Eve's face turned cold as she realized the truth. Early the next morning, Tuka and Ashrain were present, and as expected, Eve had also arrived. Without waiting for Tuka to finish speaking, Eve confirmed that what he had said yesterday was true. She needed to hear everything herself to believe it. Now, having agreed to rescue the girl, the group immediately ventured into the territory of the golden-eyed demons. Eve could only think of that place as a possible hideout. With this decision made, Tuka enthusiastically declared that the mission had begun. At the tavern where Lise worked, the owner constantly scolded her for being too slow. Lise could only apologize. When she brought a tray of water to the table, the customers, who weren't exactly kind, started causing trouble, demanding a 50% discount because she was late. The girl, trembling with fear, apologized to the customers. Hearing this, the owner rushed over and started beating Lise, calling her useless and incapable of doing anything right while claiming she had to provide her with food and a place to sleep. Lise could only clutch her clothes tightly, recalling the words her older sister had once told her. They must strive to gain their freedom. These words helped Lise hold back her tears. Seeing her mature demeanor and determined face, one of the customers showed interest, thinking that Lise was quite attractive and might be suitable for other tasks. The owner then explained that Lise had already been chosen by someone important and entrusted to her care, with strict instructions not to let her get a single scratch. The owner lifted Lise's skirt, declaring that she had kept the girl clean without a single bruise. Lise could only bite her lip in sorrow, knowing that the owner always hit her on the head right after that. Indeed, the owner slapped Lise on the head again, telling her to be more cheerful. The customers watched in shock, wondering if the owner was mentally unstable. The owner then took a deep breath and screamed directly into Lise's ear, the sound like a banshee's wail, making her feel as if her eardrums would burst. The customers, horrified, began to leave, leaving the restaurant empty. Suddenly, the sound of firm footsteps echoed. Eve had arrived. Before the owner could speak, Eve punched her, sending her spinning twice before hitting the ground. Eve remarked that she had finally heard that damned voice again after so long. Lise, seeing her sister, called out her name. The owner, regaining consciousness, screamed that Eve had a battle tomorrow and should return immediately. But before she could finish, Eve kicked her again, sending her flying 20 feet into the air and rolling away like a ball. The owner, still conscious, pointed at Eve and threatened to report her to the Duke. Eve drew her sword and approached, causing the owner to fear for her life. The owner started crying, explaining that the mistreatment was ordered by the Duke and that she would be killed if she didn't comply. Then she knelt down and begged for her life. Eve told her that if she promised to stay silent about this incident, she would be spared. The woman immediately agreed. Lise patted Eve on the back, and Eve turned to tell her that they needed to leave immediately, asking if she wanted to come along. Lise, tears of joy streaming down her face, eagerly agreed. She had longed for this day, and as long as she could be with her sister Eve, she would go anywhere. Eve then turned back to the owner and instructed her to tell the Duke that Lise had gone missing and that Eve had headed south to look for her. The owner, still cowering on the ground, promised repeatedly to report exactly that. She even told Lise to stay strong and resilient. Lise bowed and thanked her for taking care of her all this time. As Eve and Lise left, the owner, with a grimacing face, began to get up and laughed slightly. She was about to run to the Duke's house to report the news when someone called out to her. Tuka said, "You think putting on that act was enough?" He told her that only someone as kind-hearted as Eve could be fooled by her terrible performance. Sitting casually on the windowsill, he smirked and said there was no way she could keep her promise. The owner asked who Tuka was. Tuka declared that he had witnessed everything and asked her if she enjoyed abusing the girl like that. Furthermore, he explained that such sudden and violent screaming would create lasting trauma for Lise. Every time she heard a loud noise, She would think she had done something wrong, causing her to live in constant anxiety. The owner shouted that it was no big deal and had nothing to do with him. Tuka grimaced and said, "But I don't like it." He decided to punish her for what she had done. Tuka stood up abruptly, and the old woman grabbed a beer bottle. Tuka raised his hand, pointing at her as she charged him. This time it was paralysis, followed by darkness and a poison curse. The old woman immediately started writhing, her body pricked with needles, covered in red sores and bleeding. She soon sank into endless darkness, mumbling for help. Tuka told her not to be deluded, as no one could save her. He noted that he had figured it out, these 3 skills could be stacked together. Realizing her fate, the old woman said that Tuka would surely go to hell, but if he released her, he could go to heaven instead. It was clear she was delirious. Tuka drew his knife, planning to give her a bit more pain before deciding to finish her off to keep things tidy. He said that both his and her fates were already set for hell, so there was no need to discuss it further. Tuka turned back to the group, who were still waiting for him. They began to leave, and Eve asked about the owner. Tuka said he had taken care of what needed to be done. Eve realized she had been too trusting, it was a mistake on her part. The group moved down into the sewer to avoid attention. There, Eve asked Lise to introduce herself. She said her name was Lisbeth, but since it was long they could call her Lise. Tuka introduced himself and Ashrain, who was on the other side. Lise asked for permission to join Tuka, promising to do everything she could. Seeing that Lise was not afraid of danger, Tuka agreed as he had already discussed this with Eve beforehand. Eve patted Lise on the shoulder and Lise hugged Eve, thanking Tuka. Then, Tuka introduced another member, Pejamaru. Eve and Lise were surprised that Tuka had a magical creature with him, but since Pejamaru was friendly, they quickly warmed up to it. Emerging from the sewer, they reached the forest, where Tuka had prepared 2 horses. Each pair would ride 1 horse. At this moment, Eve wanted to clarify something. She wanted to know Tuka's motive for seeking out the forbidden witch. Without hesitation, Tuka took out a forbidden tome filled with ancient characters, and explained that perhaps only the forbidden witch could decipher it. Eve just wanted to ensure that Tuka had no intention of harming the witch. Tuka laughed, saying that as long as she didn't try to harm him, he would not harm her either. Suddenly, everyone fell silent. Eve admitted that she was just a simple girl, and it was her simplicity that allowed the old man to take advantage of her and made her unable to see through the owner's deceit. Tuka acknowledged that he himself couldn't see through everything either, but he told Eve that recognizing and analyzing the situation on her own was already commendable. Standing before someone so understanding and honest, Eve fell silent and then suddenly declared that she would entrust herself to Tuka and follow his every command. Tuka laughed, saying that she seemed to trust him too much. It turned out that Eve had noticed how Tuka treated Ashrain and recognized that this young man was very considerate and kind-hearted, someone worthy of her trust. Moreover, at this point, Eve could only rely on Tuka. In response to this trust, Tuka asked why Eve had made such a decision. Eve explained that after learning about a part of Tuka's abilities, she realized that he could have extracted information about the forbidden witch from her in a much more brutal way, such as kidnapping and torturing her or using Lise to coerce her. However, Tuka didn't do any of that. Even now he accepted Lise joining them, knowing that she might slow them down. Eve felt Tuka's empathy for the girl, and just that alone was enough for her to entrust her life to him. She believed Tuka was a good person, but Tuka responded that there were many people who appeared kind on the outside but were endlessly cruel on the inside. Eve smiled, puzzled by his response, but her trust in Tuka remained unwavering. Tuka smiled, pointing at Eve, and said, "Indeed, you are a kind person." They then set off, the horses' hooves clopping softly on the ground. Ashrain told Tuka to hold on tightly to her to avoid falling when they sped up. Tuka asked if she was okay with that, and Ashrain replied that it was fine since it was Tuka holding her, not just anyone. Tuka then held on tightly, sending a jolt of excitement through Ashrain, making her whole body heat up. When Tuka noticed her silence, he asked if he was holding too tightly. She stammered that it was no problem and then kept slapping her face to stay focused, making her cheeks red from the pain. Tuka didn't know what to say, and they started riding quickly, heading straight for the Great Ruins, which were about a day and a half away as they needed to bypass the city ahead. Tuka asked if there was anything to be aware of when entering the demon territory. Ashrain mentioned a dangerous creature known as the man-faced demon. Tuka was surprised and wondered if it was a unique type of demon beast. These creatures had human-like faces, but no one who encountered them survived to tell the tale. They were plentiful in the demon territory. Tuka was curious how there could be rumors with so few witnesses. Ashrain suggested that a few people might have escaped, but most had been killed by these monsters. She added that despite their terrifying power, these creatures rarely appeared in obvious places. Tuka suddenly thought it might be the same soul-eating creature from the dungeon. Considering the extreme danger of the area, it made sense for such a monster to exist there. Eve had wandered there before, and Ashrain thought that might be why Tuka wanted her to come along. Tuka asked Ashrain if she could get along with Lise. Ashrain replied that she could since Lise was a good girl. Tuka declared that he would sincerely protect Lise and Eve until they reached the Forbidden Witch's dwelling. Ashrain found Tuka truly kind-hearted, but Tuka refused to see himself as a good person, thinking they had overestimated him. Tuka explained further about his reasons for recruiting Eve. Firstly, she was an excellent warrior. Secondly, she had experience in the Great Ruins. Thirdly, she might have a good relationship with the Forbidden Witch, which would increase their safety when confronting her. On a deeper level, Tuka saw another coincidence. The Forbidden Witch was rumored to be a dark elf, and Lise was also a dark elf. Thanks to the fact that they had rescued this dark elf girl, when Eve mentioned it to the witch, she would likely be less suspicious of Tuka and Ashrain. Ashrain now understood. Indeed, her master had thought far ahead. Tuka said that in negotiations, the more advantages one could prepare, the better. But there was one more thing. Lise reminded him of himself when he was a child. He couldn't save himself back then, but Lise could still be saved. Tuka believed that a child should smile happily rather than cry and tremble. Ashrain acknowledged this, realizing her master was undoubtedly a kind-hearted person, and she cheerfully agreed. Suddenly, Pijamaru made a warning sound. Ashrain grew worried as the thunderous sound of hooves filled the air. It turned out they were being pursued by a large cavalry regiment. Tuka was quite surprised. These guys reacted quickly. Eve, beside him, mentioned that when she left the arena, she noticed a suspicious guy watching her. Tuka asked who he was, and Eve said he was the leader of the Ascent Legion named Mwaji. Mwaji was leading his men, tracking the hoof prints left by Tuka's group. He aimed to catch the leopard and the girl Lise. Mwaji calculated that for Eve to be escaping on horseback like this, she must have had help. He ordered his men to report their direction to the Duke's forces. They then noticed the hoof prints changing direction, seeing this as an opportunity to prove their worth to the Duke. Tuka realized that the Ascent group had ties with the Duke. Eve mentioned that Mwaji was quite formidable, with excellent observational skills and a cunning mind. Suddenly, Eve stopped and apologized for implicating Tuka. Because of her and Lise, she wanted to stay behind to block the Ascent group so that Tuka and Ashrain could escape safely. Eve handed Lise over to Tuka, seeing it as the best choice. Tuka argued that even though Eve was the strongest fighter, she couldn't defeat such a large group, and he would lose his guide. He feared they would quickly catch up to them. Indeed, the Ascent group was only a few hundred meters away, with torchlight visible in the distance. Tuka observed closely and guessed that this might be the second team, but still, a considerable number. He dismounted and told Ashrain to stop the horses, saying he had a plan. Eve didn't know what Tuka was planning, but he cheerfully said they would just face them head-on. The cavalry charged forward, and a leading rider spotted Eve's group's position. They believed the two glowing lights were the torches of the leopard and the girl. The information Mwaji provided was indeed reliable, and they headed north. It turned out these were the Duke's regular troops, who started shouting and charging, determined not to let the title of the Leopard Slayer fall into the hands of the Ascent or any mercenaries. Tuka and Eve were hiding behind some bushes, having overheard everything. It seemed the forces this time were divided into three factions: mercenaries, the Ascent group, and the Duke's troops. The Ascent group didn't have any warriors, so the second group was likely them. Tuka asked Eve if her night vision was good, and she confirmed it. Tuka then assigned her the task of protecting Lise and their belongings while he would hold the line here. Eve wanted to stay and fight alongside Tuka, but Ashrain was already handling the combat, and Tuka only needed someone to guard the girl and their gear. Eve was reluctant, feeling that a warrior doing logistical work was wrong. Tuka persuaded her by explaining that their enemies didn't know about him and Ashrain, so they could use that to their advantage for a surprise attack. Tuka then asked Ashrain what she thought of the Ascent group. Ashrain bluntly said that they didn't seem special beyond possessing some magical or spirit-based skills, yet Mwaji managed to make everyone believe in his power, indicating he was a cunning and deceitful person. Eve still didn't understand what Tuka's plan was. Tuka explained that Mwaji, despite being an enemy, was a sharp mind. He was likely deducing their movements based on the information Eve had about the Forbidden Witch. Mwaji had correctly guessed their northern route. Because of this, Tuka took out his mask, intending to use a counter-strategy. Everything was still according to plan, so it was time to begin. Mwaji ordered his men to stop and lower their torches. Pointing ahead, he asked if they saw anything in the dark. It was almost impossible, but Mwaji noticed a broken branch. He deduced that the Duke's vanguard had been misled and that the group they were pursuing had stopped and changed direction here. His subordinate immediately ordered everyone to sweep the forest, but Mwaji stopped him, saying it was a trap. He had realized the broken branches were deliberately placed to mislead them, indicating that someone was trying to split their vanguard from the main group. Mwaji considered that his opponent this time was also quite skilled, deducing that he used signs along the path to determine the escape direction. If they entered the forest now, it would play right into the enemy's hands. Mwaji also realized that the enemies included more than just Eve and the girl. There was someone else more cunning involved. When he saw Eve, it was clear that she wasn't the type to read books or meticulously set traps. Mwaji called out into the forest, saying he knew of Tuka's plot and demanded they show themselves, or else his troops would start killing in numerous ways, not just with arrows. At that moment, Ashrain appeared next to a tree wearing her fly swordsman mask. Seeing her cosplay as the fly swordsman, Mwaji laughed and remarked that it reminded him of the legendary king of flies. He told Ashrain to hand over the leopard and the girl, promising to forgive everything and even offering her a spot in the Ascent Legion. From Ashrain's posture and aura, he knew she was a skilled swordsman. Ashrain asked what would happen if she refused his offer. Mwaji declared that he would subject her to a curse so agonizing that she would regret ever being born. He boasted that his curses were powerful enough to defeat the 5 dragons of the Black Dragon Knight Corps. Ashrain, scornful, questioned if he truly defeated the 5 dragons. Mwaji confidently replied that even the strongest human would be utterly exhausted before them. Once again, Mwaji urged Ashrain to join him. Ashrain acknowledged, saying it was only a matter of time before Ascent found them. Mwaji, pleased, believed Ashrain was indeed intelligent and sensible. Ashrain then added one more condition before she joined, the safety of Eve and the girl. Mwaji declared that his Ascent group had significant influence with the Duke, so he could ensure their safety. Hearing this, Ashrain agreed to lead him to where Eve and the girl were hiding. She loudly proclaimed, "Everyone, follow me!" But soon Mwaji sensed something was off. He signaled his men to stop and asked Ashrain if she intended to hand over the 2 to him. Ashrain feigned ignorance, but Mwaji pressed on, asking why she used the term everyone. This task only required a few people, so why bring everyone along? Tuka, hiding behind a nearby tree, listened as Mwaji continued his analysis, suspecting that Ashrain was trying to lead them into some sort of trap. Mwaji believed that at this distance, Ashrain's trap would be ineffective, so he ordered his men to prepare for an attack. Realizing she had been found out, Ashrain turned around and drew her sword, facing the large group. Ashrain provocatively asked if they weren't planning to use their vaunted curse techniques. Mwaji replied that his men only took orders directly from him and declared that they were the inheritors of the Assassin Guild's will. Seeing Ashrain's confusion, Mwaji mocked her, saying that according to her knowledge, this Assassin Guild had been wiped out long ago. Indeed, the Assassin Guild had been eradicated by heroes from another world after eliminating the root of evil. Those heroes, having too much free time, had made the assassin guild their next target and hunted them down until they were completely wiped out. Ashrain asked if Mwaji intended to revive this guild. Mwaji denied it, saying he was merely taking over their unfinished business. When it came to assassins, Ashrain immediately thought of their primary weapon, poison. Mwaji boasted that their poison technology had advanced significantly. Some poisons caused only mild numbness while others were instantly lethal and particularly difficult to detect. Only the descendants of the Assassin Guild possessed these secret poison techniques. Assassinating without leaving a trace was the true expertise of the Assassin Guild. Ashrain now understood that this group specialized in poisoning and spreading rumors about their curse abilities. The story about defeating the Black Dragon Knight Corps was the same since they died under unusual circumstances, attributing their deaths to curse techniques, which made sense. Mwaji no longer denied it, admitting that he used the reputation of those who killed the Black Dragon Knights to make people believe in the existence of his curse techniques. Ashrain asked if he wasn't afraid that the real killer of the Black Dragon Knights would find out. With a sly smile, Mwaji said that even if that person knew, he wouldn't be afraid. Fights aren't always fair, he added, stating he would bide his time to eliminate anyone. Mwaji then asked where Ashrain's comrades were, as he didn't believe she would be fighting alone. Ashrain began to remove her mask, revealing her smooth blonde hair, and said, "Let me show you why I alone am enough. I am the survivor of the battle against the Black Dragon Knight Corps." The men behind her were instantly captivated by her beauty. Mwaji was a bit surprised, unable to believe that the fly swordsman was actually the former knight commander, Sarah Ashrain. It started to make sense to Mwaji. Since Ashrain was also a refugee, it made sense for her to be leading the others to the Forbidden Witch. However, Mwaji knew that Ashrain wasn't the one who killed the Black Dragon Knights. Ashrain, puzzled, asked why he thought so. Mwaji declared that Ashrain couldn't compare to Sivat, the strongest human, and she was even weaker than those under his command. Mwaji then introduced two individuals, Burga, who fought the leopard in the final battle, and Vargan, Burga's brother, who were the strongest in the ascent ranks. Mwaji remarked on the coincidence, believing it was fate. Their youngest brother, Zaird, was part of the White Walker group that had cornered Ashrain earlier. Burga commented that Ashrain didn't look strong at all, finding it hard to believe that his younger brother had been defeated by her. Vargan, on the other hand, considered Zaird too weak to be compared to them. Ashrain began to worry. Fighting Zaird alone had already been quite challenging, and if what these two were saying was true, they were even stronger than Zaird. Mwaji struck a pose and declared loudly that Ashrain should now understand that Ascent did not solely rely on assassination. They also had formidable combat strength, and with a strategy like his, could even defeat someone as powerful as Sivat Gatland if he appeared. Mwaji asked Ashrain what she planned to do in this situation. If she made any sudden moves, Vargan would shoot her with arrows, and if the Leopardian attacked unexpectedly, Burga would confront him. He warned Ashrain not to flee into the forest, as his men had already blocked the rear. Now it was clear who was the hunter and who was the prey. Mwaji had split his forces, with half carrying torches and following him while the other half had silently circled behind Ashrain to cut off any escape, catching her completely off guard. Mwaji, grinning broadly, revealed that he had just been stalling for time. His troops had already surrounded the area, and while they were talking, his elite soldiers were likely capturing the leopard and the girl. This, he claimed, was the pinnacle of assassination. Under the bright moon, it was now midnight. Ashrain was sweating and deeply worried. Mwaji found her even more alluring in the moonlight and thought about blessing her every night, turning her into his loyal servant. He believed that with his blessing techniques, he could extract all information she knew about the one who had defeated the Black Dragon Knight Corps. He officially cornered Ashrain, proclaiming that if she were lucky, one day she might bear his child, bringing immense glory. Ashrain gasped and silently called out to Tuka, realizing that everything was going exactly as he had planned. Meanwhile, Tuka had finished merging with Pijamaru. With a wave of his hand, dozens of Pijamaru's tentacles shot forward, piercing through the forest. After a series of rustling sounds, the tentacles extended in front of Ashrain, pointing directly at the enemies. It turned out that Tuka's group also needed time to grant these imposters an impressively abnormal status. Mwaji was startled as Tuka executed a move to paralyze the entire group in one fell swoop. A few minutes earlier, Eve estimated that the enemy force consisted of about 45 men based on the footprints on the ground. Tuka was impressed, calling her a top-notch Leopardian, almost like a censor. Eve then discovered that Mwaji's troops had split up, with 15 of them circling around to flank them. Tuka realized he had struck gold with Eve's abilities and ordered her to return to Lisa's location while he handled the ambush. Eve was reluctant, but Tuka reassured her that his own senses were quite sharp, honed through countless near-death experiences. Besides, he had Pijamaru as his assistant. Tuka lay in wait in the forest, ambushing the Ascent soldiers as they passed by, using paralysis to incapacitate them before slitting their throats with a dagger. In no time he had taken down 5 soldiers. 10 minutes later, all 15 were dead. Tuka noted that while these soldiers weren't weak, they were nowhere near the level of the 5 dragons. In this battle, Tuka tried something new by transforming Pijamaru into the soles of his shoes, completely silencing his footsteps. Pijamaru, pleased with the praise, let out a happy squeal. Tuka returned to Ashrain's location. As expected, Mwaji had discovered the broken branches and was making his way there. Tuka had instructed Ashrain to make it look like she was trying to lure them into the forest, deliberately leaving clues to make Mwaji suspicious and eager to solve the puzzle. Once Mwaji felt confident in his own abilities and saw only a seemingly weak girl, he would undoubtedly reveal his trump card. Tuka knew that Mwaji's arrogance would be his downfall. Tuka ordered Pijamaru to begin the fusion while Ashrain continued her act, even revealing her identity to draw the enemy in. At that moment, Tuka's tentacles surged forward, surrounding the enemies from all directions. None escaped, all were paralyzed, followed by a deadly toxin that spared no one. Tuka apologized to Ashrain for making her wait, but she was not angry. Instead, she felt happy that her master was concerned about her feelings. Mwaji struggled to speak and asked about his flanking troops. Tuka responded that he had taken care of all 15, leaving no survivors. Still curious, Mwaji asked about Tuka's form, wanting to understand how he had been defeated. Even in his final moments, Mwaji couldn't comprehend where he had gone wrong, believing he had everything under control and that victory was within his grasp. Tuka looked at Mwaji but didn't answer. Instead, he began counting the bodies. There were exactly 30 men, confirming the accuracy of the Leopardian's report. Frustrated by Tuka's lack of attention, Mwaji collapsed in disbelief, unable to accept that someone as brilliant as himself could die there. Tuka and Ashrain moved on, with Ashrain apologizing for revealing her identity. Tuka reassured her that she had done well and instructed her to inform Eve. Meanwhile, Tuka had another task. He needed to wait for the Duke's first unit of knights to return. They had been misled by the horses but would come back upon hearing the commotion. Everything needed to align perfectly for Tuka's plan to work. Tuka asked Pijamaru to prepare for another fusion, but Pijamaru whined, exhausted from being pushed to its limit. Tuka apologized, acknowledging that he had only considered his own mana reserves. Suddenly, Eve's voice came from behind, noting that even Tuka couldn't predict everything. She offered to help, declaring she would lead and protect Tuka, as she was full of energy and mana. Tuka then assigned Ashrain to guard Lise as they retreated into the forest. Ashrain gladly handed over the combat duties to Eve, who sheathed her sword and said she would act as bait, allowing Tuka to use his skills against the enemies. Tuka was eager to see what the strongest blood warrior of the arena could do. As the torches appeared in the distance, Tuka asked if this was the Duke's elite force. Eve mentioned that among the soldiers was a formidable fighter named Costello, rumored to be as strong as the dragon slayer Monroy and a former magic knight. Tuka asked if Costello was as strong as Eve, to which Eve scoffed, pointing out that behind these soldiers was the 3rd Regiment of the Mercenary Guild, which they needed to eliminate quickly. Meanwhile, Ashrain and Lise were together. Lise timidly suggested that Ashrain join the fight and not worry about her. Seeing Lise on the verge of tears, Ashrain understood her concerns. Lise sobbed, expressing that she didn't want to be a burden and put everyone in danger. Ashrain smiled and assured her that Tuka and Eve were exceptionally powerful warriors, and that nothing could challenge them. On Tuka's side, he relentlessly used negative status skills, truly fighting with passion. The enemy captain fell into despair, unable to believe that his entire army was being defeated by just 2 people. The force was annihilated, but Tuka felt a bit disappointed, thinking that he would have liked to see Zan show up as well. Just as he thought this, a bald head appeared, cursing loudly and accusing Eve of being ungrateful, claiming she couldn't escape no matter where she ran. Seeing Costello, Eve felt her blood boil and pointed him out to Tuka. Costello arrogantly declared that he would skin Eve and make Lise wear her skin so that the 2 could be together forever. Tuka found this guy utterly rude and used paralysis on him. The system then notified him that the target limit had been reached, 80 out of 80. Tuka had never had the chance to use it on so many targets before. As he marveled at this, Costello charged forward on his horse. This time, Tuka used darkness, striking Costello's face and causing him to fall off his horse and thrash around blindly. Eve swiftly sliced through Costello, eliminating him. She expressed regret that she couldn't fight him one-on-one. Old Man One couldn't understand why his strongest guard was suddenly down on the ground. His other guard urged him to retreat and leave the battlefield to them. Seeing his men lying dead, Zan realized that even the Ascent group must have been wiped out. He cursed them as useless for having trusted them, as they were supposed to be the ones who defeated the Black Dragon Knights. Tuka checked the system panel, calculating the number of survivors, and realized he needed to use different skills. This time he activated Berserk, causing those affected to go mad and attack their own comrades, creating chaos. Tuka then ordered Eve not to protect him anymore but to hunt down all the fleeing enemies instead. Eve didn't say much. With a powerful leap, she soared nearly 10 meters into the air, her gleaming sword drawn. Each of her movements claimed a life, and the soldiers who saw her shadow were terrified. She roared fiercely, displaying not only rare skills but also incredible speed. Tuka took advantage of the chaos to finish his tasks, using Berserk, darkness, and poisons. He monitored the skill panel, noticing that the number of paralyzed targets had decreased, perhaps some had been killed. Anyone who approached him was immediately paralyzed. Old Man One sensed something was wrong and ordered his men to attack the cloaked figure. Dozens of soldiers charged, forming a circle around Eve and Tuka, who stood back to back, facing enemies on all sides. At that moment, Eve suddenly thanked Tuka. Surprised, he asked why. Eve explained that since entering the arena, she had been forced into relentless killing and had grown weary of it. Tuka asked if she felt different now. Eve confirmed that she did, feeling a strange sense of happiness fighting like this. Suddenly, Eve disappeared in a flash, reappearing next to a soldier and slashing him down. Each time she moved, a life was taken with a single strike. Tuka silently assessed her. She wasn't just skilled in close combat, she was like a black lightning bolt from hell. This must be Eve's speed. In the blink of an eye, they cleared out a large group of soldiers. Old Man Zan was stunned, unable to react in time. Tuka remarked, "Oh, just you left." Realizing the dire situation, Zan began cursing loudly, proclaiming, "Remember this. I'll spare you this time, but next time I'll tear you apart." Tuka raised his hand, and Zan immediately fell from his horse, paralyzed. "Are you stupid?" Tuka questioned. He had never intended to let Zan survive. As Zan realized his folly, his vision darkened. Tuka remarked, "Why should I remember that?" Eve walked over and said, "It's fine if Old Man One falsely accuses me, but he made a grave mistake by harming Lise." The bald old man lay on the ground groaning, and then Eve's blade came down, ending his life. Eve returned to where Tuka was waiting and called his name. He turned and asked if she was done, and then they both headed toward Ashrain and Lise. Tuka instructed Ashrain to prepare a place for everyone to stay, as he and Eve still had some matters to resolve. Ashrain agreed, mentioning she would round up some of the wandering horses. Tuka also asked her to fetch some items from his backpack that he would need later. Lise eagerly ran after Ashrain, wanting to help. Ashrain gave her a task, telling her to bring the items to their master, which made Lise very happy. Tuka whispered to Eve to help heal Lise's spirit. promising that both of them would support her in the process. Eve asked what they would be doing next. Tuka took out a frozen bug from his chest, surprising Eve. He explained that this was the result of his freeze skill. Different from his other abilities, freeze had a limit of 3 uses, was difficult to employ, couldn't be stacked with other skills, had no damage, and lasted up to 300 days. Tuka asked Eve to try breaking it with a hammer. Eve, thinking it was ordinary ice, struck it hard, but it didn't break, much to her astonishment. Clearly this was no ordinary ice. Tuka was convinced that this ice was indestructible. If used on a living being, it would be impossible to destroy them. During his first attempt to break it with a hammer, he had no success, and even holding it over fire didn't melt it. Tuka then handed Eve another object to smash with her warhammer, and this time it shattered at the sound of the impact. Eve realized this was different from the previous one. Indeed, Tuka explained that there was a distinction between the two. One was a living thing and the other was dead. The second object, which could be destroyed, was a dead insect. A dead creature can be categorized as an inanimate object, making it less durable and easier to destroy. When it shatters, the fragments are easily blown away into nothingness. Destroying such an object also decreases Tuka's count. Eve still didn't understand what Tuka was trying to do, so he explained that he was researching ways to handle corpses. Eve quickly grasped the concept. Tuka wanted to freeze the corpses, but she wondered why not just leave them as they were. Tuka pointed out that these were the bodies of those who had claimed to have killed the Black Dragon Knight Corps. By removing these bodies from existence, he would ensure that the Ascent group carried the title of Dragon Slayers forever. Anyone doubting them would have to investigate, only to find that Ascent had vanished completely, leaving their claim unchallenged. Eve understood now, that was why Tuka had been so determined not to let anyone escape from the beginning. Tuka would start by smashing the corpses, though he admitted he wasn't thrilled about the task and asked if Eve would help. Having fought in countless bloody battles, Eve had no problem with it. Once they were done, they would leave behind a fly swordsman mask as a clue for any pursuers. They diligently went about their work, the sound of Eve's hammer echoing through the forest. As they worked, Tuka talked about the legend of the Fly King, noting that this demon clan had opposed both the root of evil and humanity, refusing to ally with any side. In many ways, the Fly King seemed to fit Tuka's situation, though all the Fly King's followers had perished. Tuka was determined not to repeat that fate. The legend went in 2 different directions, suggesting the Fly King was either alive or dead, each with its own justification. What about Tuka? What would his fate be? News of Tuka's disappearance reached the king, who yelled in disbelief, wondering if that damn one had had trouble with Ascent. The king angrily recalled having warned Zahn to be cautious in dealing with them. He had hoped to find a scapegoat who claimed to have killed the Black Dragon Knights to deceive the public and neighboring countries. Now he didn't know how to report to the goddess. He had promised to verify if Ascent had really killed Civet. While Nyan had been recalled by the goddess, indicating her growing trust in King Jin, the king reflected on how formidable Ascent was. They had annihilated the Duke's troops and killed Costello. There was no doubt left, Ascent was indeed the group that had slain the Black Dragon Knight Corps. Thinking about this, King Jin calmed down. The priest below asked the king how they should report this to the goddess. The king ordered them to find Ascent at all costs. The priest then asked about the matter of the leopard. The king, irritated, said it was a trivial issue and not worth discussing. The important task now was to find Ascent. He shouted orders to mobilize all forces to search for Ascent. Goddess Vizes was intrigued as she read the report from Urza. She hadn't expected such a brutal massacre. She asked Nile if he believed that curse techniques truly existed. Nile firmly replied that he did not. The goddess commented that the situation was indeed frightening. If the Mad King chose to use such techniques, it would be troublesome. However, she couldn't send Nile back to Urza because his responsibilities there were crucial. Meanwhile, the 4 saints had arrived. They were siblings stronger than most, possessing the bloodline of previous heroes. The youngest brother remarked that Goddess Vi seemed overly focused on the progress of the war against the Demon King. They didn't quite understand why, as the Demon King's attacks on humanity didn't directly affect the goddess or the root of all evil, yet she appeared unusually anxious. With a smiling mask, the goddess responded that there was nothing wrong with being concerned, though she found the boy's comment quite irritating. Both siblings immediately fell silent. A servant announced that Ban Wolf had arrived. The man with a sword on his back entered, rubbing his head and apologizing for being late. The goddess formally welcomed him, revealing that this was the renowned dragon slayer, a rugged yet extraordinary figure. In the courtyard of Alien Castle, Ace sat casually and remarked to Popo that the atmosphere seemed tense lately. Popo, surprised, asked why. Ace poked Popo's large chest and teased her, saying that all her nutrition must have gone there, leaving her brain underdeveloped. Despite being ranked 8th in the class, Ace's words carried weight because of her unique skill, Queen Bee, which allowed her to boost the power of multiple people simultaneously. Her group dominated the battlefield when buffed with this skill. Yasu's group had also grown much stronger, but he seemed to play alone within his group despite being a powerful rank A warrior. On the other hand, AKA's group gained experience more evenly, allowing her teammates to increase their necessary skill points. These skills were common and could be obtained upon reaching a certain level, divided into 5 categories: attack, defense, healing, power increase, and abnormal status. Once a level was reached, the skills would unlock, changing their skill tree. The higher the level, the stronger the skills. Recently, abnormal status skills had been seen as quite useless with vague effects, even when used by heroes. However, as each individual's unique skills grew, their effectiveness evolved along with them. Minamino, currently an enhancement mage, was surprised at how much her buffing spells had helped Ace. After Ace weakened the monsters significantly, her teammates rushed in to finish them off and gain experience points. This was the strategy that Ace's group used to fight. While Kirihara was nearing level 200, Akaya was only at level 115. After reaching level 100, everyone's growth rate slowed considerably. Strangely, even at level 115, Akaya still hadn't acquired any unique skills, making her possibly the only rank S without such abilities. The Cow sisters had already gained their unique skills. Minamino asked Ace if she was worried about her skills. Thanks to the skill tree, Akaya had managed to enhance several combat skills, allowing her to fight solo effectively. However, these combat skills were still weaker than unique combat skills. She closed her system panel and resolved to work harder. Suddenly, the goddess and a group of people arrived. The T sisters immediately became alert, following the goddess, where the 4 saints and the dragon slayer were also present. The students noticed the handsome appearance of the 2 male saints and learned that the 4 were siblings. The goddess's voice rang out, thanking everyone for their efforts in fighting and training. However, she felt they still lacked combat skills and needed to enhance their abilities through another round of training. Ace noticed that the 4 saints were very powerful, and so was the werewolf. The goddess assigned Izuge's group to the 4 heavenly swords, while the dragon slayer would train Yasu's group. Nyan would train the T sisters, and the 4 saints would train Kirihara's group. As the goddess was about to leave, Hijiri pointed out that Ace's group still didn't have a trainer. The goddess looked at them dismissively and said that their trainer was supposed to be Civet, but since he was dead, she didn't know what to do. She added that she trusted Akaya, believing she had ancient combat techniques to teach her teammates. Hijiri argued that this was unfair, seeing another rank S opposing her. The goddess adjusted her stance, saying she couldn't summon another of her apostles at the moment and sincerely apologized. Instead, she offered double pay for any guest trainers willing to take on the job. No one responded, and just as the goddess was about to make an announcement, Ban Wolf raised his hand. He said he would do his best to increase these heroes' survival rates and asked if the goddess had any objections to his training them. Annoyed, the goddess asked what he meant. Ban Wolf requested a few bottles of good wine, and the goddess sarcastically told him to train them without diminishing their quality. Ban Wolf agreed. The goddess declared that they would move to the ruins to continue fighting monsters and leveling up. She mentioned that the Demon King's forces were advancing with an increasing number of monsters. This battle would be much larger than the one at the knight's castle, so the heroes needed to level up quickly. They were preparing for a massive battle. Prepare well for the upcoming battle, proud heroes of Ilion. The goddess announced. After making her declaration, the goddess immediately sent her heroes into training. Watching from above, she thanked everyone, believing that as long as they listened to her and achieved the goals she set, everything would be fine. She saw herself as a kind and forgiving person. The second child of the four saints sat down to rest and casually asked what the goddess's next plan was. Looking at the heroes training hard, the goddess said that the most important thing for them was to level up. With the Demon King's army actively mobilizing, they had very little time. Therefore, they would depart tomorrow for the Great Ruins. At the Great Ruins, Tuka and his group were making their way through the forest. Eve mentioned that she hadn't sensed any monsters yet. Tuka knew that Eve had been here before. Eve explained that when she was here previously, she was in a state of fleeing, only knowing the path they had taken and where to find water. There were also areas with a few abandoned buildings. Tuka understood that what had driven Eve and others to flee was the man-faced demon. In other words, if they could defeat the monsters, they could advance further. Ashrain asked Lise if she was scared. Despite dripping with sweat and visibly anxious, Lise insisted she was fine. Tuka encouraged her, reminding her that she was now a member of the mercenary guild. Lise added that as long as her sister was with her, she wasn't afraid. Hearing this, Eve apologized to Lise for the suffering she had caused due to her own foolishness. However, Tuka quickly dismissed Eve's sadness, saying that as long as she was alive to protect Lise and had left Monroy, that was more than enough. Eve admitted that she couldn't compare to Tuka. They continued their journey, crossing a stream and chatting, which made the time pass quickly. Tuka opened the map to review their route, wondering if they could continue straight ahead as the map wasn't very clear. He noted that if they encountered any obstacles, they would need to find a way around. Suddenly, a creature appeared before them. It had the body of a lizard, walked on two legs, and had a large golden eye. It was indeed a golden-eyed monster. Eve drew her sword as the monster charged at them with surprising speed. She dodged its swipe and leaped into the air to avoid its tail strike. Tuka quickly used paralysis, effectively freezing the monster in place, then followed up with poison and sleep. They watched it quietly. Eve wondered how strong the monster was and thought she could probably handle it alone. Tuka remarked that it was very weak compared to the monsters in the ruins and found it lacking in terms of speed, combat ability, and resilience. If the remaining monsters were similar to this one, Tuka felt confident they wouldn't pose much of a threat. As they continued, Tuka mentioned to Ashrain that he had seen a two-headed leopard monster in the Great Ruins and asked about the differences between that monster and Eve. Ashrain explained that golden-eyed monsters were influenced by the root of evil, which was why their eyes were golden. Tuka wondered if a creature like Pijamaru could turn into a golden-eyed monster. Pijamaru whimpered in fear, but Ashrain reassured them that no one had ever seen that happen. In other words, golden-eyed monsters were likely born that way. Tuka couldn't remember how many regular monsters he had encountered, except for slimes. He recalled that most regular monsters hid from humans because a hero had warned about the risk of regular monsters transforming into golden-eyed monsters, leading to a great purge across the continent. This resulted in regular monsters hiding far away from humans to preserve their species. Tuka then asked about the elven race, and Ashrain explained that humans often classified elves as demi-humans, possibly viewing them as a midpoint between humans and monsters. Most demi-humans, including elves and dark elves, tended to avoid humans, though elves had the closest relationship with them. However, demi-humans were generally treated unfairly in the human world. Changing the subject, Ashrain suggested they consider naming their group. After pondering, she proposed they call themselves the Fly King Squadron, a name derived from a famous squadron once led by the Fly King that had not yet been claimed by anyone else on the continent. Tuka thought the name was interesting and agreed to it. As they traveled, they encountered a large monster covered in acid. Tuka attacked using paralysis and berserk, apologizing to Eve but asking her to let him handle this one. The large monster fell immediately after being hit, and Tuka quickly moved in with his dagger to gather materials. Eve clicked her tongue in annoyance, thinking that if she had known how strong Tuka was when they first met, she would have definitely run away. Ashrain, sweating, wanted to ask Tuka to take a break but worried he was in a hurry. Tuka perceptively asked Lise if she was tired. Having gathered enough materials to make enhancement potions for Pijamaru, he decided they should rest for a bit. Suddenly, a strange sound emanated from his backpack, resembling something breaking. Tuka bent down and opened it, while Ashrain drew her sword and Eve remained on high alert. It turned out to be an egg Tuka had picked up in the mirror ruins, which unexpectedly began to move and crack open. Everyone held their breath as the egg glowed brightly and then shattered, revealing an incredibly cute foal that muttered something meaningless. "Pampy!" They were astonished. How could an egg hatch into a horse? Lise noticed that in an instant the foal had grown larger. Eve confirmed it, acknowledging that it indeed had grown. Tuka, sweating, wondered how an egg could hatch into a horse. It must be some kind of monster. Ashrain knew of a few horse-like species but wasn't sure if this foal belonged to any common type. Pijamaru, excited about the new friend, jumped down to the ground to communicate. The two creatures had an adorable exchange, but Ashrain worried the foal might pose a danger. Tuka reassured her, saying he wanted to observe it further and would handle it if it turned out to be dangerous. Lise approached and made friends with the foal, which seemed very happy, making cute QY sounds as Lise hugged it. Tuka remained cautious. When he found the egg, it had been wrapped in a strange cloth. He began to pet the foal, feeling its skin and the hardness of its body. It was indeed very tough, not your typical horse. He then noticed a gem on its back. Ashrain speculated that it was a mana absorption organ, which some species had. Tuka asked everyone to step back, leaving just him and Pijamaru. Eve, curious, asked what he intended to do. Tuka planned to infuse the foal with mana, which made sense to Eve, explaining why it had grown so quickly after hatching. Tuka opened the status panel to check how much mana was required and then began transferring his mana. A blinding light ensued and the foal cried out, "Pewee!" Eve watched in excitement as the foal transformed into a robust, fully grown horse with a striking black and red coat. Lise admired its beauty, while Ashrain realized that this must be its true form. Tuka noted that it took 1,000 mana to achieve this transformation. The horse let out a happy melody and then made a sound urging him to continue. Understanding, Tuka patted its shoulder and infused more mana. His mana was abundant like the ocean. Tuka infused 1,000, then 5,000 and finally 10,000 mana. The horse's muscles bulged, transforming it into a mighty two-horned steed with eyes shining like headlights. Tuka felt a bit intimidated by the sight, but the horse stomped its hoof, asserting that this was its true form. Tuka covered his face in amazement, while the others approached to get a closer look. Tuka patted the horse's head, saying he didn't expect to gain such an interesting companion. The horse seemed to enjoy Tuka's touch, closing its eyes in delight. Ashrain remarked that it probably saw Tuka as its father, behaving like that when being pampered. She then asked Tuka what he intended to name it. Tuka thought quickly and asked if SLE would work, a name derived from Odin's horse. The horse whinnied in joy, clearly liking it, and Ashrain smiled, expressing her hope to work alongside SLE in the future. Tuka asked if SLE could revert to its original form. It nodded and instantly transformed back into a foal. Tuka realized he could change SLE's form at will. Ashrain commented that SLE's second form would be helpful for carrying loads, while its fierce third form could strengthen their combat capabilities. After having a chance to fight monsters, they would better understand SLE's abilities. Suddenly, SLE licked Ashrain's face. Tuka remarked that it seemed to really like her. Blushing, Ashrain was embarrassed but pleased. This development was good since Ashrain would be riding SLE until Tuka learned how to ride. Tuka pulled out a cloth to wipe Ashrain's face. She asked if it was all right, to which Tuka half-jokingly responded that for the sake of group unity, he needed her to have a good impression of him. Ashrain agreed, and the two shared a tender moment in the corner while Lise played with SLE. Tuka complimented Ashrain's beautiful skin. She closed her eyes in embarrassment, thinking Tuka was referring to the horse, not her. This affectionate exchange was indeed heartwarming for the group, making everyone feel closer. Meanwhile, at Alien Palace, Beowulf wondered why the goddess had left him behind. He suspected that there would certainly be casualties on this mission to the golden-eyed demon territory. The goddess replied that security was also needed here, and since she had already sent the heavenly swords, the four saints, and Nyan with them, they should be safe. Beowulf realized the true reason he was not allowed to go. He had been appointed as the trainer for AIA's team. The goddess immediately contested his claim, telling him not to underestimate the dragon slayer. Being experienced and wise, Beowulf suggested that perhaps the goddess wanted AIA's teammates to die. The more grief-stricken and heartbroken AIA became, the easier she would be to control. For a brief moment the goddess's smile faded, but she quickly resumed her cheerful demeanor and asked about Beowulf's father. It turned out that his father was ill, and the medicine Beowulf needed to keep him alive could be found in a mine controlled by Alien. The goddess took Beowulf's hand, reassuring him that as long as she spoke well of him to the king, the expensive medicine would be provided abundantly. Beowulf, with a wry smile, noted that even the famously lazy dragon slayer had to obey the goddess's words. In the territory of the Great Ruins, AIA's group was fighting monsters. AA ordered Popo to quickly finish off the monster, urging her not to keep the group waiting. However, Popo didn't enjoy killing monsters at all. A leaned in and whispered in her ear that they should quickly kill the monsters and level up. The second child of the four saints stepped forward, his face serious, and turned to the students, saying that the aura of this monster might not be suitable for novices. He instructed the students to take a few steps back and told Kirihara, the drunken sword girl, to tighten her defenses. Kirihara, hearing the command to retreat, arrogantly put his hands on his hips and scoffed, claiming he had only encountered weak monsters since arriving and saw no need to step back. Just as some students began to run away, Popo was shocked by the monstrous creature before her. A massive demon worm emerging from the bushes, towering several meters high and roaring menacingly. A sage from behind remarked that she had never seen anything so terrifying. Nan, however, remained calm, quickly drawing her sword-like iron tail, and declaring she would take down the first one while the second child of the four saints would handle the second. He asked Abyss beside him if he would join the fight, to which Abyss naturally agreed. The students retreated, watching the spectacular scene unfold. Their instructors were not only unafraid but also engaged in battle with precision. Nan, with her graceful form, performed a deadly dance, moving at incredible speed and dealing significant damage to the giant worm. She flipped and twirled around, slicing it into pieces that fell to the ground before she sheathed her sword, having completely vanquished her target. Popo and a sage stared in awe, realizing this was the power of the goddess's apostles. On the other side, the second child of the four saints leisurely swung his sword, which transformed into flames wherever he slashed, cutting the beast apart. This led the students to think he was more suited to fighting the Demon King than they were. Meanwhile, Kirihara stood behind, complaining that they had been told to retreat just for these monsters. Kirihara channeled his mana into his hand, declaring that he would show everyone what true power was. Instantly, a fire dragon appeared. This was his ultimate skill, Flame Dragon Burst. As soon as it appeared, the dragon bit through the demon worm and lifted it into the air, enveloping the entire area in Kirihara's mana. He boasted that this was his unique skill at level 4, showcasing the power of a future king. Eri noticed the disturbance and suggested to Itsuki that they should return to the group. They had just finished dealing with some strange figures when Hijiri wondered aloud who these people were and why they had committed suicide as soon as they were discovered. Itsuki speculated that they could be foreign spies, but Hijiri had another theory. Perhaps the goddess had sent these people to sabotage certain members of their class. At a cluster of houses in the Great Ruins, Tuka's group was resting and having a meal. Tuka noticed the strange light and asked Ashrain what it could be. Ashrain suggested it might be a battle between monsters. If the root of evil had created golden-eyed monsters with different abilities, they would certainly fight each other. However, Tuka suspected it might be a battle between humans and monsters. After that, everyone started to go to sleep. Ashrain, talking in her sleep, muttered something about being a boring noble elf, which was why Tuka never smiled or joked with her daily. Tuka didn't understand why Ashrain said that while he hadn't slept yet. The two went outside to talk, and it turned out Ashrain had shared some stories about her past. People said that Ashrain was an unparalleled beauty but lacked a sense of humor. Perhaps that was why she was dreaming about it. Eve thought Ashrain had many good qualities and didn't need the vile humor of the nobles. Suddenly, a dense black mist emanated from inside the ruins, startling Tuka. Inside, Ashrain and Lise were also awakened. Tuka stated that he and Eve would go down first. The two of them descended into an underground chamber. Tuka infused the chamber with mana and instructed Eve not to reveal herself, even if the door opened, which was why they needed to go ahead of the two girls. The door opened, and they waited a moment before entering. A sense of foreboding filled the air, sending shivers down Eve's spine. A bizarre creature was tapping its claws on the floor. Eve peeked inside and saw a human face. It was the man-faced monster that Ashrain had described. Returning to their earlier concerns, they guessed that multiple monsters had approached the location of the Forbidden Witch. Or perhaps these monsters preferred living in the outskirts rather than the center. Tuka asked Lise if she was all right. She responded that although she was a bit scared, her sister had said that as long as Lord Tuka was alive, they would reach their destination safely. Eve spoke by the firelight about Ashrain, saying that Ashrain truly surprised her, being an elite warrior with superior intelligence. If Ashrain were to wield divine equipment, she would surely be invincible. Ashrain told Eve to stop because she was too embarrassed, while Tuka believed that if Ashrain exerted her full strength, she wouldn't lose to the Black Dragon Knight. Tuka declared that he only won by not allowing his opponents to unleash their full power, so he very much needed the support of warriors like Eve and Ashrain. Eve realized that this might be how Tuka had defeated Civet, the strongest human. However, Tuka noted that there were still many other powerful beings, such as a formidable woman in Jado called Curia, who led a devout army and was rumored to be the strongest in that land. Below her were four sisters known as the Four Saints, who might succeed Saint Jado in the future. The strongest person in the southwest of the Mila Empire was the Mad King, though few had seen him fight, so his strength remained unclear. The Mad King had two trusted aides, the first princess and the second princess, who were also extraordinary. Tuka guessed that Eve was the strongest in Urza, but Eve disagreed, saying there was someone even stronger known as the Dragon Slayer. Eve admitted she couldn't rival him. Ashrain was regarded as the strongest in the holy nation of Aina, while the Bako Empire had Civet Gartland. Tuka then asked about the Magnar Empire, and Ashrain replied that it was Sigurd, the commander of the White Wolf Knight Brigade. In the kingdom of Arion, there were the 6 unmatched cavalrymen, but a more renowned name among fighters was Nyen Kik Pat. Additionally, there was a famous mercenary group not affiliated with any nation known as Saber Tiger or Drunken Sword. Eve mentioned another group, the White Walkers, but both Ashrain and Tuka already knew they had been wiped out. Another name was brought up, known as the Sword of Valor, a descendant of the Brave Blood clan. However, Eve didn't know much about this person. Tuka was pleased to have gathered useful information, noting that once they entered the Great Ruins, they needed to worry more about the monsters than the humans. The monsters possessed absurd strength, especially a type called the Man-Faced Demon. Eve advised that if they encountered this creature, they should run as fast as possible, as even she would be helpless against it. The man-faced monster emitted a dense black aura, crawling slowly while making eerie buzzing sounds. Eve broke into a sweat, barely daring to breathe. Tuka, hiding behind a pillar, praised the creature, noting that its evil face showed it wouldn't spare them. He then declared, "Now we will kill it." Eve was shocked, questioning how they could take it down. Tuka, guessing that this monster, like the Soul Eater, was poor at hiding its emotions, planned to create chaos to observe its reactions but knew he couldn't fight it alone. He realized the monster must know they were there but hadn't attacked yet. If it did, it would be extremely fast and no one could escape. This meant it either wanted to toy with them until they died or was outside its attack range. Eve punched a hole in the wall and threw a stone hard at the monster below. Suddenly, the demon's tongue shot out quickly, revealing that its attack range was quite close. Its mouth drooled continuously, indicating its hunger. Tuka assessed that the monster's close-range attack was extremely fast, faster than Eve could see. An idea struck Tuka, and he called out for SLE. SLE immediately fused with Tuka, and Eve understood their plan. She agreed to take on the remaining role, coordinating perfectly with Tuka, who infused SLE with magic power. Eve believed she was a better rider than Tuka and confidently declared she would ride SLE to attract the monster. Tuka declared he would defeat the monster. Even though Eve wasn't entirely confident, she would do it if Tuka asked, without fear. Earlier, when they tested the monster's range by throwing the stone, Tuka realized the monster's range wasn't very far, just fast. Therefore, he needed Eve and SLE to act as bait. SLE, with its 8 legs, had incredible speed. Tuka knew that because the man-faced demon enjoyed tormenting its victims, it would definitely target their legs, making it much easier for them to avoid its attacks. Eve commanded SLE to move forward as they entered the attack range of the monster. Its long tongue lashed out, but with Eve's superior combat instincts combined with SLE's incredible speed, they managed to continuously evade the deadly strikes. Meanwhile, Tuka calmly guided Pijamaru's tentacle closer to the monster, using one tentacle that, after many experiments, proved to be extremely agile and precise. Tuka stayed highly focused, knowing the man-faced demon would quickly target Eve's head. As his tentacle got close enough, the monster gleefully enjoyed its game of cat and mouse. Tuka was equally pleased. Excited by the thought of crushing the monster's sadistic pleasure, he unleashed a paralyzing attack, causing the demon to go stiff with its eyes rolling back. He followed up with a berserk strike, dealing multiplied damage. Black blood spurted from all its orifices, inflicting immeasurable pain, and the man-faced demon exploded like fireworks. Tuka successfully leveled up to 106. This encounter had netted him significant experience points. Eve halted her horse, panting heavily, and praised Tuka in astonishment for managing to defeat the demon. Suddenly, the monster's corpse began to glow, and a brilliant light shot into the sky, piercing the ceiling and ascending to the heavens. Tuka recognized this phenomenon. It was calling for reinforcements. The ground started to tremble violently, and Tuka immediately understood that a horde of beasts was on its way, each with terrifying faces and glowing yellow eyes. Tuka and Eve quickly returned to Ashrain to inform the group that they were surrounded by man-faced demons on all sides. If they couldn't escape, they would never reach the Forbidden Witch. Since Tuka and Pijamaru had the highest survival rate, he decided that he, SLE, and Pijamaru would act as bait while the others tried to escape. Upon hearing this, both Eve and Lise disagreed. Tuka convinced them that since Eve had already met the witch, a second encounter would make negotiations much easier. Additionally, Tuka's unusual abilities were especially effective against the man-faced demons. Ashrain took out a mask and a magical stone. Tuka fitted the stone into the mask, which was a loudspeaker he had asked Ashrain to prepare. Ashrain didn't comment on her master's decision but helped him equip himself and mount his horse. Tuka instructed Ashrain to lead the others in their escape, taking advantage of the distraction caused by the horde. Filled with faith in Tuka, Ashrain wished him luck. Tuka donned the mask and began to leave, reminding Ashrain to take care of the others. With SLE's legs propelling them at incredible speed, they dashed off like a rocket, stopping at a high point. Tuka infused the loudspeaker in the mask with magic and commanded Pijamaru to sound the battle signal. Pijamaru's cry pierced the air, immediately exciting the beasts below, which began converging on the source of the sound. At this moment, Ashrain signaled everyone to leave their hiding place. Meanwhile, Tuka was pursued by countless large yellow-eyed monsters, including several man-faced demons. Apologizing to SLE and Pijamaru, Tuka asked if they were willing to entrust their lives to him. Their silence was agreement enough. Raising his hand, he prepared to unleash a wide-area attack. However, before he could strike, a scythe swept through, cutting down all the ancient trees in the area. "Damn, that scythe is sharp," Tuka muttered, but the dense forest slowed the monsters down. Dismounting, he got into position and unleashed a berserk attack. The first monster he hit roared and clawed at the one next to it. Tuka continued to run, leaving chaos in his wake, cheering, "Hit them harder!" He circled around and used Berserk again, causing the remaining monsters to turn on each other. Tuka marveled at the effectiveness of this attack in close combat, but noticed that some of the leading monsters had figured out his attack range and were keeping their distance. Tuka knew he could only keep running as the monsters gradually formed a circle around him, but this was exactly what he wanted. He initiated a fusion with Pijamaru, realizing that a circular formation was ideal for taking them out in one sweep. Pijamaru's tentacles extended outward, unleashing a paralyzing attack that struck countless beasts. Tuka continued using Berserk, but he noticed his mana depleting rapidly due to the fusion, confirming that this attack was only suitable for high-speed massacres at medium and long ranges. He needed to finish off the man-face demons quickly, as their high HP made the effects of toxins last longer. The combination of paralysis and Berserk was his best option, causing the monsters to suffer more damage the more they moved, potentially tearing their bodies apart and making blood gush like a river. A rain of blood fell, and the system notified him of 18 level-ups, refilling his mana. Tuka calculated that if he kept using experience points to level up, his mana would replenish, allowing him to fight longer. However, it was extremely risky. He was alone, and one unlucky hit could mean his end. Doubted moments surfaced in his fighting spirit, but Tuka recalled his reasons for everything: the ridiculous rank title and that goddess. He had to survive to take revenge, to wield this power and continue living to destroy everything and kill them all. Activating his Death God Slaughter mode, he became determined not to compromise or retreat. Meanwhile, elsewhere, the students were leisurely farming monsters in the forest when suddenly a horde of yellow-eyed beasts charged at them. Aya ordered everyone to run towards an escape route while she decided to hold off the enemies. Using her agility and ancient combat techniques, she successfully took down the first beast but began to feel fatigued, hoping everyone else could escape. Turning to check on her friends, Aya confronted a horrifying sight. 2 of their classmates had been killed. She rushed to Yasu, asking if they had managed to escape. Yasu coldly replied, "Probably not." This callous response enraged Aya, who scolded Yasu for doing nothing when the demons appeared. After all, they had been classmates, and as they were in Yasu's group, he should have protected them. Yasu, equally furious, snapped at Aya to shut up, accusing her of being pretentious and looking down on everyone. Confused, Aya asked what he meant. Yasu continued his tirade, saying that Aya's saintly facade belittled everyone, flaunting her superior stats without words. Stunned, Aya stood speechless as Kirihara stepped in, calling Yasu pathetic and stating that only success elevates a person's aura. Kirihara added that Yasu should forget about feeling superior as he was too short and weak. Drawing his sword, Kirihara declared it was time to show Yasu his true nature. Oyamata approached, laughing loudly and saying Yasu's smug attitude was hilarious. Kirihara added that the aura of a king was only fitting for him. Despite Yasu being rank A, Kirihara expressed willingness to be understanding toward Yasu, but the latter, enraged, began to unleash his fury, intending to use his unique skill to attack Kirihara. Kirihara, unafraid, thought Yasu was beyond help, merely putting on a show. Yasu then pointed at Aya, saying, "You're the one who needs to get a grip on reality." Aya, confused as to why she was being dragged into this, observed the scene. Yasu shifted his scorn toward Aya, claiming her existence was proof that even an S rank could lack a unique skill. He pointed out that a Seiji, despite being a B rank, was stronger than Aya's mediocre unique skill. In other words, the rank of hero was insignificant. Yasu unleashed his magic power, declaring, "I will prove who the real ruler is. You'll see you were wrong, you bastard." Kirihara closed his eyes while Oyamata prepared for a fight. Kirihara stopped him, stating that some people always wanted to equate themselves with S-rank heroes, mentioning that unworthy S-rank heroes could damage team morale. He suggested that Aya should reassess her position. Aya knew she had tried her best but still couldn't measure up to other heroes. Kirihara, despite his words, was secretly bitter and planned to deal with Yasu sooner or later to prove who the Real King was. Minamino and her friends ran up to check on Aya, while a Seiji also approached, teasing that Kirihara and Yasu could never be good friends like this. They were searching for Papo, whose real name was Kashima. Hearing about the kind girl, Aya asked about her, learning that they had used her as bait to escape. Shocked, Aya couldn't understand why her friends had acted so selfishly. They said they were terrified of the monsters, and Aya, having been born with a silver spoon, couldn't comprehend their fear. Horrified at her friend's selfishness, Aya decided to look for Kashima alone. She approached AI and invited her to join the search, but AI told her to try her best on her own. Aya was surprised because Kashima was part of a Seiji group. A Seiji casually explained that losing Kashima was a loss, but they had other responsibilities and needed to protect the remaining members. They suggested that the task should be left to the four saints or Nidan, who knew the area better. Determined, Aya resolved to search for Kashima by herself. The second child of the four saints stopped her, saying the instructors would search one more time before sunset. They had noticed something very unusual in the demon territory today and decided to end the training session early. Aya couldn't respond before Itsuki turned and said they were now stronger than her. Apologizing, she added that Aya was a burden to the entire class and should focus on leveling up on her own. Feeling abandoned, Aya opened her system panel and saw she was only at level 143. She felt weak. Stung by her teammates' criticism, she swore to become stronger and stronger as she wandered back into the forest. Meanwhile, the sound of Kashima's hurried footsteps echoed through the woods. Having been chased by monsters, she ran without stopping, leaving unfinished marks along her way. Remembering Tuka from that time, she felt helpless, curling up in fear. Kashima had tried her best to improve her condition but remained too weak. Getting lost like this surely meant death. Suddenly, laughter echoed and Kashima sat down on the ground in terror. In front of her stood a bipedal leopard. Seeing her, Eve wondered why a human was in this place. Kashima curled up in fear, but not long before, Eve and her group had found a small cave to hide in. Eve told everyone she would go find Tuka. Ashrain remained silent while Lise asked Ashrain if she had any ideas, but Ashrain stayed quiet. Eve expressed her certainty that Tuka was still alive. He wouldn't engage in battle, but returning unscathed seemed unlikely. Thus, she would search for him, reasoning that the monsters might mistake her for one of their own and ignore her. Besides, moving stealthily through the forest was Eve's specialty. She could carry Tuka back in case he or Eseli were injured. Finally, Ashrain spoke, saying she wouldn't leave Lise alone because she knew Tuka wouldn't allow it. So she decided to stay and wait for everyone. Lise felt a pang of emotion as Eve prepared to leave. Eve patted Lise's head, expressing gratitude to Ashrain as she departed. She entrusted this responsibility to Eve, who leaped into the forest below, moving swiftly among the trees. Standing on a mountain ledge, Eve observed the rain beginning to fall. The signs of battle on the ground indicated that Tuka's fight had been tough. The marks suggested he had been engaged in a circular skirmish with the monsters. Hearing something, Eve initially thought it might be Tuka but couldn't sense him or the others. She drew her sword and approached the source of the sound, only to find Kashima curled up in fear. Startled, Kashima thought the monster could speak human language. Assuring the girl, Eve was suddenly confronted by a lightning-charged hand. Itsuki charged straight at Eve. Thinking the monster was about to attack, Eve quickly used her sword to block Itsuki's electrified blade and jumped back to maintain distance. Itsuki was astonished that this monster could block her attack, something only an S-rank hero could do. Undeterred, she continued to charge at Eve, perplexed by the girl's relentless and hostile attacks. Itsuki raised her finger and fired a powerful bolt of electricity, hitting Eve and leaving her paralyzed. Itsuki declared there was no way Eve could evade her attack, and Eve collapsed. The electric shock was incredibly painful, even damaging her throat, rendering her unable to speak. Itsuki apologized, explaining that her sister had ordered her to rescue Kashima at all costs. Kashima called out Itsuki's name just as Eve tried to remember it, associating it with the girl who wielded electric shocks. She wondered if the attack was magic or something else since it didn't come with thunder. Likely it was Itsuki's innate talent. As Itsuki continued her assault on Eve, the latter realized that these were heroes from another world. Engaging in close combat, she attempted to analyze her opponent's abilities. It seemed Itsuki's electric shocks had a long range, and Eve wondered if she had any chance of escaping. Itsuki, on the other hand, was surprised to see the monster still moving despite being hit by her second-level attack. Disappointed, she thought she was still too weak. Moving like lightning, her speed increased significantly, and Eve recognized that this girl had truly grown from real combat experience, focusing on highly effective attack methods. Itsuki circled behind and aimed a critical strike at Eve's neck. Suddenly, Hijiri's voice called out, telling her to stop. The blade was just at Eve's neck when Itsuki, acknowledging her sister's presence, said she'd been waiting for her. Hijiri saw that Kashima was safe, and Kashima, hiding behind Hijiri, said she had nearly died. Itsuki asked her sister why she had stopped her from killing the monster. Hijiri clarified that it wasn't a monster but a beastkin. Eve knelt on the ground, silent. Hijiri noted that this species possessed superior intelligence and behaviors similar to humans. Itsuki, still confused by her sister's intentions, suggested that perhaps this leopard could speak to them, but Itsuki's electric shock damage had harmed Eve's throat, which Hijiri deduced from Eve's gestures and eyes. She added that judging the intelligence of other beings based on language was foolish. Frustrated by Hijiri's words, Itsuki stepped forward and apologized to Eve on her sister's behalf, explaining that Eve had shown no hostility yet her sister had attacked because she had followed instructions too strictly. Hijiri then instructed Itsuki to apologize to Eve, bowing deeply. Itsuki admitted she was a fool and expressed gratitude to have a smart sister. She asked Eve if she was okay, but Eve couldn't respond. Hijiri reassured Itsuki that it wasn't entirely her fault and that she should share some responsibility in the matter. Turning back to Eve, Hijiri requested permission to ask a few questions, instructing Eve to respond with actions, raising her right hand for yes and her left hand for no. Eve nodded in agreement. Hijiri asked Eve if she harbored any hostility toward the three of them. Eve raised her left hand. Then, Hijiri asked if it was okay for the three of them to go their separate ways. Eve raised her right hand. Understanding, Hijiri explained that they were there to retrieve Kashima and had no intention of fighting Eve. Eve observed the girl in front of her, noticing that, like Tuka, she didn't show her emotions, making her hard to predict. Her instincts told her not to deceive this girl. Therefore, she agreed and planned to part ways with them as soon as possible. Eve wondered what would happen if Tuka encountered this girl. Suddenly there was a noise behind Eve. Hijiri waved her hand, and a gust of wind sliced the monster behind Eve into dozens of pieces, which then exploded into dust. Eve was astonished. How had this girl detected the monster? She felt her reactions had been slow, thinking of Ashrain, who might have a similar level of skill. Itsuki felt that no matter how strong she was, she couldn't compare to her sister. Hijiri remarked that no one starts off strong, beginning to lecture Itsuki with highly technical terms, leaving Itsuki bewildered. When she asked if she could explain more simply, Eri listened closely. Realizing she didn't want these heroes to know about her existence, Eri decided not to mention Tuka. Hijiri asked Eve if she understood that deceiving them would be disrespectful. Eve responded that she was searching for her master. Itsuki was relieved to hear Eve speak, fearing that she might regret her actions forever. Eve bowed and apologized for touching Kashima without assessing the situation. Seeing this polite behavior, Hijiri guessed that Eve's master must be a good person. Eve confirmed this, and Hijiri noted her master was human. Startled, Eve quickly asked to leave, at which point Hijiri introduced herself as Hijiri Toa, a hero summoned by the goddess Visis. Eve replied, introducing herself as Eve Speed. Hijiri recognized the name as that of a missing blood warrior but promised not to reveal this information. She continued expressing interest in Eve's master, suggesting that the fact Eve was searching for him indicated he might still be alive, despite the forest being full of fierce monsters, including man-faced demons that even the continent's strongest struggle to handle. Eve couldn't help but admire Hijiri's insight. Everything she said was spot on. However, Eve declared that her master couldn't be measured by normal standards. Meanwhile, in the distance, the sounds of battle continued to roar. Tuka was riding SLE at a frenzied pace, with a large group of monsters still on his tail. He employed hit-and-run tactics, gradually accumulating experience. Each level up replenished his mana, allowing his fusion with Pijamaru to continue. Despite the risks, this was his only way to survive. At this point, his Berserk skill had leveled up, unlocking the ability to designate a single target rather than multiple ones, though it remained challenging to use this in close combat. As Tuka unleashed his skills, he adeptly dealt with airborne enemies by putting them to sleep, causing them to fall. A combination of paralysis and electric stun formed an excellent instant combo, yet electric stun couldn't extend its attack range. In such cases, Tuka found that using poison on multiple targets worked effectively, while the sleep skill handled airborne threats. The darkness skill required minimal vocalization, making it suitable for unexpected close encounters. With his strategy in place, Tuka believed his chances of survival had increased significantly. He continued to pick off enemies one by one, his focus solely on killing. The system repeatedly announced level-ups, and eventually SLE came to a stop, exhausted. Tuka felt like collapsing on the horse's back. Surrounding him were countless monster corpses. Lee was injured in one or two legs, and Tuka had several cuts on his thighs. However, his high HP meant he bled little and experienced significantly reduced pain. With only 3 monsters remaining, Tuka sensed this was the final round. He dismounted, apologized to his 2 companions, and asked for their help one last time. In front of him were a fast-moving demon wolf, a medium-range monster that shot spikes and had 4 eyes, and a long-range monster that emitted beams of light. The wolf charged, the 4-eyed monster shot spikes, and the large-mouthed monster spewed a beam of light at him. Tuka planned to use Berserk on them, knowing this would make them turn against each other. Sure enough, the wolf and the 4-eyed monster began tearing into the long-range attacker. The wolf emerged victorious but was subsequently paralyzed and berserked by Tuka, who executed a final strike. As the rain began to fall, Tuka remarked that there probably wouldn't be any more monsters around for a while. He leveled up 2 more times, reaching level 2019, and unlocked a new skill that seemed to be an advanced form of paralysis. Just when Tuka thought the world had finally calmed down, growls echoed from the surrounding forest. Smaller monsters had approached, ready to turn him into dinner. Tuka realized these were stragglers, likely late because of their slow pace. Fortunately, there were no man-faced demons or particularly strong creatures, making it a perfect opportunity to test his new skill. Upon using the skill, everything around him slowed down as if time itself had decelerated, and he remained unaffected by the slow effect. He also noticed that SLE and Pijamaru being close were not slowed either. Tuka attempted to cast 5 debuff skills simultaneously on the monster in front of him, but the system rejected the attempt, indicating he couldn't use multiple skills at once. He would have to handle each manually. Drawing his knife, he approached the monster as it slashed at him. Thankfully, his reflexes, honed by numerous near-death experiences, saved him again. He realized that if enemies came within a 1-meter radius, they were no longer affected by the slow effect. Quickly, Tuka stabbed the wolf-like creature before it could react. Reflecting on his new skill, Tuka understood that it affected all targets within its range, regardless of their awareness. It was useful for preventing sudden attacks or escapes, but it was specialized and best used sparingly. The skill's effective duration depended on 5,000 mana points, and once depleted, the effect ended. Therefore, even with plenty of mana left, Tuka's physical stamina had reached its limit, and he collapsed, thinking to himself that this was bad. Fortunately, Eve arrived in time. She carried him on her back and sped back to the cave. When Tuka opened his eyes, he saw Ash Rain beside him, letting out a long breath of relief. She looked happy that her master had woken up. Tuka realized he was in a cave but didn't see Eve around. He asked about SLE and Pijamaru, and Ash Rain replied that they were fine, being pampered by Lees nearby. Kneeling beside him, Eve welcomed him back to consciousness. Tuka apologized for making everyone worry. After checking that his injuries were not serious, Eve mentioned that she had encountered heroes from another world while searching for him. By the campfire, Eve recounted her interaction with the T-sisters. Tuka smiled, thinking that those two might be obstacles in his quest for revenge, but for now he was too weak to pursue that path. Before mastering forbidden magic, he knew the goddess Mimori had to die. As Tuka tried to sit up, Ashrain quickly stopped him, advising him to rest more. Tuka remarked on how lucky he was to have Ashrain by his side. A girl skilled in healing, swordsmanship, and spirit magic, knowledgeable, and an excellent rider. He felt he needed nothing more. Ashrain modestly said her master was exaggerating. Tuka reassured her, expressing his happiness to have her with him, regardless of what she thought. Ashrain couldn't hide her joy and thanked him. Lise was tending to Eve's arm wound nearby. Tuka commented that the feeling he had was like having a sister. Ashrain, surprised, asked how old Tuka was. He replied that he was 17, and she blushed, admitting she didn't expect Tuka to be younger than her, having assumed elves were much older. In fact, Ashrain was only 19, surprising Tuka, who thought she was over 100. Ashrain explained that many elves' ages corresponded closely to their appearances, much like humans. When Tuka asked how old she thought he was, Ashrain shyly confessed she had assumed he was in his 20s due to his mature demeanor. Tuka acknowledged this but asked if he could be treated like a younger brother. Ashrain refused, insisting that as the king of the Fly King Squadron, she could never treat him with less respect regardless of his age. Tuka found this amusing, appreciating her sincerity, and thought the title Fly King Squadron was quite funny. As everyone settled in for the night, Ashrain stayed by his side, asking if he had trouble sleeping. Tuka admitted he couldn't sleep. Ashrain blushed and suggested he sleep on her lap for comfort. Surprised but not rejecting the offer, Tuka mentioned that his aunt used to do that when he was a child. Ashrain wanted to talk more with Tuka, making him wonder if she seemed burdened. She had seen the difficulties Tuka carried alone and wanted to share them, fearing he might collapse one day if he didn't. Tuka argued that he had much higher endurance, but Ashrain didn't believe him. He then said that if Ashrain cared about him so much, she should help him as much as possible. Ashrain didn't hesitate to agree, and they talked for a long time until Tuka fell asleep. Ashrain gently stroked Tuka's hair, marveling at how a boy filled with vengeance, who had overcome countless dangers, could look so peaceful and innocent while asleep. She had never seen Tuka so unguarded, and unable to resist, she placed her hand on his chest. It was the first time she had fallen in love with someone. Realizing she had gone too far, Ashrain blushed and withdrew her hand, knowing she needed some sleep too. As Ashrain carefully lifted Tuka's head to move him, being so close to his face caused her to lose control. She climbed on top of Tuka, stared at his face for a long time, and then decided to take a bold action, kissing him passionately while he was unaware. Meanwhile, Kashima was thanking Itsuki for saving her. Itsuki told Kashima to just call her by her name instead of Toa-san. Kashima felt that Itsuki was still as wonderful as before. Hijiri remarked that people could change their nature no matter where they were, which made Kashima think of Hijiri as amazing too. Itsuki wondered why Kashima, who coordinated so well with the class president, didn't leave the Seiji group. Kashima recalled how the Seiji would always weaken a monster and then force her to deliver the final blow. Eventually, she chose to obey as the Seiji insisted on cooperation and threatened that without it, they would destroy each other. A Seiji always intimidated Kashima into following her orders. Kashima replied that she wouldn't leave the Seiji group, but Itsuki felt that the Seiji was problematic, a fact known to everyone. However, Kashima believed staying in the group could be beneficial later, possibly even saving Aya. Itsuki was surprised and saw no connection, prompting Kashima to explain further. She said Aya was very intelligent and ambitious but often hid her ambitions, knowing that Kashima lacked the courage to oppose her. The Seiji kept her in the group, allowing Kashima to gather information. If she ever discovered a Seiji doing something harmful to Aya, she would be the first to warn her. Hijiri, after listening, understood a few things. They were right to look for Kashima. She mentioned that it seemed the goddess had sent people there for some purpose. Hijiri speculated that the goddess was trying to manipulate Aya by killing some of her teammates to drive her into despair. This way, the goddess could easily make a compromise and turn an S-rank hero into a pawn. Kashima was horrified, asking how the goddess could do such a thing when she was the one who summoned them. Hijiri recalled that the condition to return to their original world was to defeat the Demon King. However, even if they managed that, there was no guarantee the goddess would actually let them return. Back at the heroes' camp, everyone was excited to see Kashima return. Aya immediately ran over to check on her, and Kashima said she was safe, thanks to the Tea sisters. Kirihara stepped out, arrogantly remarking that their disappearance had only wasted his time. He told the Tea sisters to quickly decide whether to submit to him or join the losers. Itsuki, irritated by his condescending tone, stepped forward and retorted, "Are you brain damaged? I'll never take orders from someone who always scores lower than me on tests." Kirihara grimaced and clicked his tongue in frustration. He was about to make a move, saying Hijiri's sister was difficult to deal with, but Itsuki immediately slapped his hand away, shouting for him to get his filthy hand off her. The two began to unleash their magical powers. Kirihara declared that he would show Itsuki the difference in their power to crush her rebellious spirit. Itsuki stuck her tongue out and taunted him, saying she challenged his entire family. One unleashed a dragon's roar while the others summoned lightning. However, before they could clash, they were scolded loudly by Nan, who shouted that if they intentionally made things complicated, she would spank them just like she did to Oyamata. Humiliated, Kirihara backed down, cursing under his breath. He blamed those self-righteous fools for constantly hindering him, lamenting that the ignorant masses couldn't grasp the current situation. Much like in their previous world, the poor and stupid always dragged others down. This was the duty of a king, he thought. Feeling it difficult, Itsuki angrily told her sister not to waste time arguing with people like him. Hijiri thanked her sister. Just then, one of the four saints appeared on horseback, announcing they would leave before dawn. The friends behind cheered in excitement. He also informed them that the Demon King's army, which had been lying low, had started advancing south. Returning to Tuka's group, he noticed that the trees around this area seemed strange, appearing extremely vibrant and alive. Somehow there weren't any monsters in sight, which made him wonder if they were nearing the witches' territory. As they continued, they encountered giant warriors, who of course fell to Tuka's hand. They then entered an abandoned village and descended into the underground basement. To their surprise, there was a sky down there. Tuka sensed an enormous amount of mana beneath the lake, making it an ideal place for a witch. Eventually, they met a female dark elf staring at them from above. The witch had a tan complexion and a stunning figure. She began speaking in Elvish, which they didn't understand. Ashrain stepped forward and responded in the same language. The witch was surprised to find someone in the group who understood the ancient tongue. She revealed she had been testing them, aware of a group wandering around. When Ashrain tried to confirm her identity, the witch cut her off, declaring that there was no need to state the obvious. She twirled her staff and introduced herself as Erica Anail, planting her staff firmly on the ground and adding that she was the rumored forbidden sorceress. The goddess Vices smiled as she read the report on the internship at the Great Ruins, noting that there had been casualties, with several rank heroes dead, but it didn't matter to her. She then questioned Nyan about why Aya's beloved friends were still alive. Kneeling below, Nyan reported that someone had intervened and protected them. The goddess then asked about the Tea sisters, remarking that granting them freedom seemed to have caused some losses. Nyan reported that their power was growing rapidly, so there were no problems. However, the goddess felt they were progressing too slowly. Nyan started to explain but stopped and simply apologized. The goddess roared that someone had to make the tough decisions when progress was slow. As she spoke, the goddess shoved her hand into Nyan's mouth. Nyan began to lick and suck on the hand to show her loyalty. The goddess, with a face like a demon, declared that unconditional forgiveness was not a sign of benevolence. She proclaimed that in this world, strength was born from suffering, then forcefully shoved her hand deeper into Nyan's throat, causing tears to stream down her face. After all, the goddess was not the one suffering. In the northwest city of Magner, the place was a battlefield. Wounded soldiers helped each other, and one soldier reported that the eastern and southern cities had been destroyed, with reinforcements unlikely to arrive. The Demon King's army had attacked from 3 directions simultaneously, catching the national army off guard. Old Man Nog, the former commander of the White Wolf Legion, ordered a rapid retreat to Kaba to fortify their defenses on the city walls. Weary warriors looked down as hideous ogres continued to climb up. The ogres emitted a vile aura, causing humans within their range to move slowly, tire quickly, and consume more mana than usual. One soldier asked the commander if Lord Sood's Knight Regiment had been defeated. He was the only Holy Demon sword unit in the area. Commander Nog was doubtful, believing that no one could escape the effects of that cursed power. Their only hope lay with the heroes from another world, who were unaffected by the wretched breath and might defeat the Demon King. Suddenly, a horse-drawn carriage came crashing towards them, hitting a rock and tipping over, spilling out numerous corpses. Commander Nog recognized them as people who had evacuated to Sapa. He climbed the city walls and witnessed a terrifying sight. It wasn't their reinforcements but a vast army stretching to the horizon. All troops of the Demon King lined up in perfect order, highly skilled. Young soldiers fell into despair as the synchronized footsteps of the approaching monsters pressed them to flee. At that moment, a flying monster swooped down, crashing through the city wall and loudly proclaiming itself as the loyal servant of the Demon King. The winged, goat-headed monster named Drada taunted the humans, urging them not to give up easily but to be resilient and survive by their own abilities. It declared that regardless of what they did, the monsters would brutally destroy them. This news quickly spread to the Human Alliance, alerting them that the scale of this attack was far greater than previous ones. The Demon King had launched a blitz attack in 3 directions, causing Magner to fall swiftly. The goddess urged the kingdoms to unite more than ever, or else everything would turn into disaster. Heroes were also being deployed to prepare for the battle at Magner. Returning to Tuka, ever since he was thrown into the Great Ruins, he had survived, killed, and searched for a forbidden spell capable of killing the goddess. Now it lay right before him. Tuka recounted everything to the witch, who was surprised to hear he had even managed to kill the man-faced demons and control the golems with his power. Tuka explained that it wasn't magic, but a form of power possessed by heroes from another world. Erika understood immediately. If Tuka was a hero from another world, then he must be an outcast. Everything Tuka had said now made sense to her. But why had he come to find Erika? Tuka raised one finger, saying first to find a place of refuge for the leopard man and the girl behind him. If they didn't receive protection here, their future would be nothing but a life on the run. The witch then asked if Tuka and the elf girl didn't need protection as well. Tuka spoke up, saying they would leave after asking her for a favor, and promised never to disclose any information about her, as it wouldn't benefit him at all. Erika was surprised by how careful and reasonable this young man was. She then asked what favor Tuka needed. He immediately replied it was about forbidden magic. Erika was startled and then let out a sly laugh. Tuka took out the book of forbidden magic, stating he was still looking for someone who could understand it. Erika guessed his intentions, asking if he wanted forbidden magic to defeat the goddess. Tuka confirmed, but Erika immediately responded, "Impossible." Confused, Tuka asked why. Erika elaborated, questioning if he was worthy of it. Was she referring to being worthy of the forbidden magic to kill the goddess? Erika then turned to Eve, asking if she belonged to the Speed clan. Eve confirmed, introducing herself as Eve Speed, daughter of Adam Speed. Hearing this name, Erika softened her tone and gently inquired about Adam and Pocky. Eve replied that her parents had passed away. Erika expressed sorrow and apologized, to which Eve responded that it was okay, as it was the truth. Eve produced a map, explaining that it was the one Erika had given to her family. Her father had instructed that if they ever needed the help of the Forgotten Witch, they should follow this map. The witch then inquired about the destruction of the Speed clan. According to Eve, they had been attacked unexpectedly, and she was the sole survivor. She then met Lise, another wanderer like herself, and the two became sisters in life and death. Erika asked Lise for her name, to which she replied, Elizabeth. Erika inquired about Lise's parents. Lise recounted that she had lived in a dark elf village deep in the forest with her parents, until knights claiming to be from the alien army came, killing and pillaging. Upon hearing this, Erika cursed the goddess. Tuka watched the witch's expressions intently, as Lise continued explaining that by some stroke of fate, she met Eve. The two of them relied on each other to survive, and when Lise was in danger, Tuka came to their rescue, freeing both her and her sister Eve. Erica looked at Tuka, who remained expressive. As if understanding something, she closed her eyes and declared that under normal circumstances, she would refuse immediately. However, today was different. A young girl had lost her family just as she had, and another girl was the daughter of Adam Speed. Therefore, she agreed to let them stay, but she pointed out that Eve and Lise were being used by Tuka to get close to her. Eve immediately responded, saying she didn't care if that were true. Tuka had done so much for them and risked his life to bring them here. In truth, Eve admitted she had also been using Tuka. Lise loudly declared that she didn't care either, as long as she could help Tuka. The witch struck her staff on the ground, praising Tuka for being sharp and not bad at all. She then decided to take everyone to her place. Tuka realized they had passed the first test, and felt excited as he remembered Erica's question about seeking power to defeat the goddess. Once inside, Tuka recounted his entire journey. Surviving the Great Ruins, defeating the Black Dragon Guild, destroying Aeson, and eliminating the yellow-eyed monsters in their own territory before finally arriving at Erica's place. Erica wondered how Tuka had managed to survive with only abnormal status skills, knowing they had a low success rate akin to failure frames, suggesting a system error. Tuka wasn't surprised that his abilities were considered defective. Erica understood that the goddess had thrown him into the ruins and that Tuka sought revenge. However, the goddess had the ability to nullify status effects, which was why Tuka had come all this way. Erica realized that Tuka needed forbidden magic to destroy the goddess's protective barrier. She informed him that the goddess had formidable combat abilities and was rumored to have mind control powers. The man-faced demons, in particular, indicated that the goddess was indeed insane. Tuka was shocked to learn that the goddess had mind-controlled the man-faced demons. Erica then asked if Tuka knew the origin of the yellow-eyed monsters. The essence of the man-faced demons was the yellow-eyed monsters, yet there had never been a man-faced demon in the Demon King's army. Erica speculated that the condition for the transformation of the yellow-eyed monsters involved consuming human flesh. Tuka's perceptiveness surprised Erica, leading her to praise him for his insights. Tuka wondered how the goddess managed to brainwash the man-faced demons. Erica explained that it involved feeding the yellow-eyed monsters human flesh after they had already been brainwashed. Just hearing this made Ashrain nauseous, and she asked how many times the goddess had done this. Tuka speculated that this was likely how the goddess brainwashed the soul-eating demons and placed them at the exits of the ruins. This comment intrigued Erica, who praised Tuka's keen insights and admitted she was quite interested in him, although she added that he would need more time to earn her trust. She suggested he focus on healing his injured left shoulder in the meantime. Erica mentioned that it seemed the goddess had discarded all the strongest individuals among them. The Forbidden Witch's home was inside a giant tree. Ashrain remarked that the Forbidden Witch, Erica Anael, was quite amiable. Erica had traveled extensively and finally chose this place as her residence, seeing the goddess as a thorn in her side. Fortunately, she had agreed to let Eve and Lise stay. Tuka called Ashrain, asking if she was all right with him only having one small bed. Ashrain immediately blushed, stammering that there was only one double room, making it sensible for Lise and Eve to stay there. Besides, Ashrain believed that wherever her master was, that was where she belonged, and she would give everything to Tuka. With the lights off, Ashrain and Tuka shared the bed, both facing the same direction. Ashrain mentioned it was her first time sleeping with a man who wasn't her father. Tuka, with his eyes closed, replied that it was the same for him. She then asked how he could seem so calm. Tuka responded that he thought controlling himself around the opposite sex wouldn't be an issue for Ashrain, even though he understood the reason and promised to explain it another time. Ashrain blushed and said she had something to tell him later. Tuka acknowledged this and tried to sleep, but Ashrain couldn't close her eyes, lying still. Mischievously, Tuka teased Ashrain, telling her she was a beautiful, wonderful person who attracted others and should be confident in herself. Ashrain's eyes blurred with sweat as she felt overwhelmed by his kind words. Just as Tuka continued saying the woman he cared for most in this world was Ashrain, She jumped up, her face flushed, and exclaimed that she couldn't take it anymore and was about to explode. She begged Tuka to use the sleep skill on her. Tuka obliged, putting Ashrain to sleep so she could rest peacefully. As the surrounding spirits dispersed, Tuka looked at her beautiful face, murmuring, "You are truly something else." On a long and winding path, the human army marched in large numbers. Aya was part of this legion and felt intimidated by the sight of the army up close. This was the Southern Defensive Army, and humanity had also split into 3 divisions like the Demon Kings. The Western Front was led by a Sagei, supported by the Saber Tiger mercenaries. The Eastern Front featured the T-Sisters, Nyan, and the alien cavalry joined by the Magnar Knights. Aya, Kirihara, and Yasu led their group alongside the Dragon Slayer Banwolf and the Four Saints, all heading south. The goddess Visus of Alien was also accompanying this southern division. Noticing Aya's worry, Suwa asked if she was okay, admitting that she knew things weren't fine and that everyone had changed. The situation was perilous, as they were facing war. Aya tried to stay strong, assuring Suwa that she was fine and would do her best to protect everyone. The goddess suddenly spoke up, saying that if Aya wanted to help protect others, she should learn a unique skill as soon as possible. Aya was taken aback and remained silent. Visus covered her face in mock disappointment, saying that if Aya couldn't do it, Alien would be humiliated for ranking her as an S rank. This wasn't just Aya's problem, it was a national issue. All Aya could do was apologize. Ban Wolf, standing nearby, intervened, saying that whatever the case, he knew Aya had been trying her best. Ban Wolf believed that Aya's team was growing stronger each day and that she would become formidable in the future. The goddess found his words grating and insinuated that Ban Wolf had a special interest in Aya, perhaps even liking her. Aya blushed, feeling a bit scared. Ban Wolf laughed, asking why Aya was getting flustered and pointed out that since the Demon King appeared she had become more irritable. This comment annoyed the goddess, who quickly departed, saying she was merely reminiscing about a few things. Ban then turned to Aya, advising her not to pay attention to the goddess's words. He encouraged her to learn to rely on others more and not to fight alone. Aya thanked him but suddenly frowned, telling Ban to put out his cigarette. Startled, Ban complied, realizing this was Aya's angry side. She mentioned that when she was a member of the student council, she was nicknamed Demon Aya. Suwa asked Ban if the goddess was truly upset because the Demon King was starting to get serious. Ban speculated that it might be due to the Black Dragon Knights being wiped out, including Civet Gartland, the strongest man among humans. Ban guessed that the goddess had high expectations for Civet, and Aya thought that his death had derailed the goddess's plans. Ban added that if Civet were still alive, the goddess might consider killing off a few more heroes. Aya was horrified. Ban explained that the goddess's greatest fear was a rebellion from powerful heroes. She hadn't purged the heroes yet because the strength of the Demon King was still uncertain, and acting rashly could lead to unforeseen consequences. The group of spellcasters who killed Civet was still unknown to the goddess. With her habit of controlling everything, there were now too many unknown variables, which was why she was so irritable. Kirihara told Visus that he hoped she had prepared the stage for him. The goddess smiled, saying that Kirihara was her trump card and couldn't be used too early. Kirihara, wanting to shine and become a ruler, sighed in disappointment, claiming that being a ruler was his destiny and that waiting was too tedious. Kirihara opened his system panel and imagined a crown in the void, reaching out and saying, "I am 50 levels higher than Hijiri, which shows the gap even within the S ranks. In short, my pride doesn't allow me to escape from my destiny as a ruler." The goddess looked at him and smiled, noting that Kirihara truly had great ambitions. Suddenly, a scout rushed in, reporting a sudden increase in the number of monsters in the east. The second son of the Four Saints asked skeptically if it was a raid. The scout replied that the monsters had suddenly appeared on the battlefield, and the Silver Wolf cavalry had to quickly retreat from IRA and fortify Horn Fortress. Fortunately, there were minimal casualties. The saint guessed this might involve large-scale summoning, but the goddess dismissed this, stating that if they could do that, they would use it for a raid. This suggested that monsters were being created directly on the battlefield, indicating that the Demon King had truly appeared. Returning to Tuka, Erika announced that she had something surprising to show them. Tuka was curious about what she intended to do. She instructed him to infuse some mana into a magical bracelet. Tuka complied, and suddenly Eve began to glow, transforming before their eyes. She had transformed into a beautiful girl. Lise barely recognized her sister, who had turned into a stunning beauty. Erika explained that this bracelet was designed for Eve's speed clan, allowing them to transform into humans. This was her gift to them. Eve was amazed by her transformation, noting that humans didn't have fur, and now neither did she. She realized this was why humans liked wearing clothes. Erika cherished Eve's parents because they were kind-hearted people with a lot of faith in humanity. However, she knew that this faith might put them in danger, so she had painstakingly created this special bracelet. Without her tail, Eve felt slightly off balance and knew she needed to practice to fight effectively in this new form. Tuka immediately ran over, asking Eve to teach him swordsmanship while Ashrain would teach him horseback riding. If he mastered these skills, it would ease the burden on both of them. He chuckled, admitting that seeing Eve as a beautiful girl reminded him of this. Of course, Eve agreed right away. In this form, she wouldn't revert unless someone infused mana into the stone on her arm. Erika also guided Tuka on adjusting the mana settings to transform Eve into different forms. Tuka playfully suggested a silly form, but both he and Eve agreed it wasn't quite right. Erika, however, found it incredibly adorable, which charmed Lise behind them while Ashrain covered her mouth, laughing. Afterward, Tuka began learning horseback riding with Ashrain while Eseli couldn't resist turning back to give a mocking smile. In the afternoons, he practiced swordsmanship with Eve. During breaks, Lise would bring them tea and snacks, and life in this peaceful place continued like this. Eventually, Eve patted Tuka on the shoulder, laughing as she told him he truly had no experience in this field. Erika was always observing Tuka, wanting to confirm something. One evening, Erika entered the living room and found Tuka reading a book. She realized he was holding the Book of Forbidden Magic and asked if he often read it. Tuka replied that he did whenever he had free time. Curious, Erika moved beside him to peek at the book, asking if he had found it in the Great Ruins. However, being quite perceptive, Tuka handed the book to Erika without hesitation. Surprised, she asked if he wasn't worried about showing it. Tuka felt he had nothing to worry about. It was Erika who should be cautious. Meanwhile, Ashrain and Eve stood outside, admiring the nighttime forest. Erika, being a connoisseur of forbidden magic, was immediately captivated as she opened the first page. She exclaimed that the book was truly overwhelming, revealing numerous strange things. She was certain this world would be profoundly changed. She asked Tuka if he knew who the author was, and he answered it was the sage Angland, also known as the Dark Hero. Erika knew the name but had thought he had completed his duty of eradicating the root of evil and returned to his original world with his friends. She didn't expect his fate to be so miserable. As she turned to the blood-written lines, she realized that even Sage Angland and his friends couldn't defeat the Soul Eater. She saw that the book contained knowledge about enhancing slimes, which explained why Tuka's Pijamaru was different from other slimes. Flipping through the pages, she read voraciously, noting, "I think he used his detoxification skill in his experiments, so hardly any monsters were sacrificed during the process. Perhaps the great sage was able to repeat the experiments thanks to his heroic skills." Tuka was surprised that even the Forbidden Witch found the book so valuable. Without taking her eyes off the book, Erika continued, saying she couldn't access such knowledge, likely because it was created based on heroic skills. She then asked about the items on the table. Tuka explained that they were tools created from the knowledge in the Forbidden Book. He had made a device that could change and amplify his voice using magic stones. However, his main focus now was upgrading Pijamaru. Erika looked again at the page detailing this and pondered. Tuka mentioned he was missing one final ingredient, a rare flower. Erika asked if it was a particular type of flower, and Tuka confirmed, asking if she had any idea. Erika reached into her cleavage and pulled out a small vial, saying she had it right there. She handed it to him as a gift, and Tuka was astonished, unable to believe that Erika would give him something for free. Erika walked away, saying that his daily conduct had earned him this gift and urged him to complete his work quickly. Afterward, the two of them worked together to research the secret elixir. Ashrain peeked in from outside, and it turned out they were creating an enhancement elixir for Pijamaru. Tuka asked if it was ready, and Pijamaru, always eager, was indeed ready. Tuka dropped a single drop onto Pijamaru, who flattened out like a pancake and then let out a loud scream of Pijamaru. A massive shock wave erupted from the house, causing Eve and Ashrain to rush over. They saw Pijamaru's enlarged body sticking out of the window, and the witch inside remarked on how the great sage had created something so fascinating, though her house was now in disarray. Tuka, pinned against the wall, told Pijamaru to return to its original size. Initially confused by its new form, Pijamaru quickly learned to control its body and shrank back down. Erika collapsed to the floor, while Tuka lifted Pijamaru, excited about how this new ability would greatly enhance Pijamaru's combat capabilities. At that moment, a pigeon flew to the window, and Erika went to converse with it. She received a message stating that her informant had reported the Demon King was marching south with a large army. The battle was incredibly intense, likely involving both saints and heroes. The first princess of the Holy Kingdom of Nihilheim was also participating. Based on their achievements, it seemed Himim had reclaimed Nia's old territory from the Bakuo Empire. Erika mentioned this, knowing that Ashrain was the leader of the cavalry of that land. Hearing this, Ashrain's heart raced, and Tuka realized that his companions could not stay out of this conflict. Erika remarked that humanity was fighting with everything they had on a vast field. Hijiri was using wind magic to unleash firepower on the enemy. The Eastern Army cheered under this barrage, their fighting spirits seemingly boosted. Itsuki appeared from behind, reporting that the commander had just ordered a retreat. A man on horseback arrived, praising the extraordinary power of the otherworldly heroes. This was Sigurd, captain of the White Wolf Knights. Hijiri modestly accepted the praise while Suki stared intently at him, realizing the enemy still had reinforcements. Sigurd requested Hijiri to take them out. Afterwards, they would clean up the remaining forces. Hijiri agreed to the task, and Sigurd ordered the troops to prepare for the assault. As soon as Hijiri struck, they would charge. The soldiers behind him shouted their assent in unison, their morale sky high. Itsuki wanted to join in, so Hijiri instructed her to take care of the surviving monsters. Her younger sister then activated her lightning skill, surrounding herself with electricity. This skill, the Thunderbearer, maximized her speed, and the two sisters attacked together as the army behind them advanced, following the heroes. After the battle, they were given a break in a carriage. Hijiri was reading a piece of paper. It turned out she had asked someone to show her the reports meant for the goddess. Itsuki was surprised at her sister's audacity. The report from Urza mentioned an anomaly in an underground tomb, revealing that the cemetery was actually the Great Ruins. Hearing this, Itsuki immediately thought of Tuka. Wasn't that where he had been thrown? Hijiri explained that they had found traces of someone surviving and leaving that place, but she had no faith that Tuka could have survived. She had gathered information from all over and was quite certain about it, but now, after piecing events together, she felt the possibility of Tuka surviving wasn't zero. Itsuki broke into a sweat, wondering if Tuka Mimori was truly still alive. At the Forbidden Witch's residence, Tuka suddenly entered a room and found Ashrain praying alone. His voice startled her. Tuka said he was worried after hearing about Himim's situation. She replied that regardless of the battle's outcome, she believed Himim would reclaim Nia one day. For now, she was Tuka's warrior and her past self was gone, her strength was solely for serving Tuka. Tuka stepped forward, grabbed her shoulder, lifted her chin, and asked why she was crying. If that were true, he apologized but insisted that she wasn't the only one who could detect lies. He resolutely asked if she truly wanted to help Himim. He knew Ashrain didn't dare to say it, but she needed to understand that she was Tuka's sword, and that was enough for him. He wouldn't accept her suppressing her feelings for someone she truly cared about. Ashrain, feeling hurt, started sobbing and insisted that she and Himim had properly parted ways. Tuka, knowing she was trying to argue, told her to cheer up if she was telling the truth. When she couldn't, he criticized her acting skills. He had asked Erika about the war and knew that Himim's army hadn't yet fought any battles. According to the information he had, the Demon King's army was still far from Himim's troops. Therefore, Tuka decided he would discreetly blend in with the mercenaries and join the battle. Ashrain was surprised and asked what her master's intention was. Tuka wanted Ashrain to properly say goodbye to her princess. Ashrain, no longer arguing, started sobbing again and said, "That's right, then let's go." Tuka said, extending his hand. He would help her fulfill her wish, and conveniently he had a few people he needed to eliminate. This concludes part 2. Thank you for watching, and don't forget to subscribe for the next part. My channel will always feature interesting manga like this. I appreciate your support.